Microexpressions are fleeting facial movements lasting less than half a second, flashes of emotion that appear before a person has time to consciously control their expression. FBI agents spend years training to catch these signals during interrogations. When a suspect claims they weren't present at a crime scene, but their face flashes a quick trace of fear when a specific location is mentioned, that microexpression tells the truth while their words lie. Paul Ekman, the psychologist who pioneered this field, discovered that there are 7 universal emotions that manifest identically across all cultures: happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, surprise, and contempt. These emotions leak through faces in the first fraction of a second before social masks take control. In business settings, when someone in a meeting says, "Great proposal," but a barely visible grimace of disgust appears for an instant, that's a signal the proposal wasn't well received regardless of diplomatic words. When a boss discusses new opportunities, while fear crosses their face, things aren't as stable as presented. Neuroscientists discovered that microexpressions occur because the limbic system reacts faster than the prefrontal cortex can censure them. Ekman's book, Emotions Revealed, documents how these patterns repeat across all cultures from Papua New Guinea tribes to Wall Street executives. Practical application involves training through slow-motion video analysis, studying photographs during key moments, or being more conscious of rapid changes in people's faces. One microexpression doesn't prove lying, it could be nervousness. But when appearing at critical moments aligned with specific topics, it becomes a signal worth investigating. Those who master this describe it as removing a filter from reality, suddenly seeing what people actually feel while saying the opposite. The pause in conversation creates more power than most people realize. While the majority automatically rush to fill every moment of silence, those who understand communication dynamics know that intentional quiet creates pressure that forces others to reveal more than they intended. Skilled negotiators use this technique when someone makes an offer. Instead of immediately responding, they simply pause, maintaining eye contact, letting the silence stretch. The discomfort becomes unbearable for the other party, who often starts talking again, sometimes sweetening the deal or revealing information they hadn't planned to share. This works because humans are deeply uncomfortable with conversational gaps. Research in social psychology shows that silences longer than 4 seconds create acute anxiety in most people. The brain interprets prolonged silence as social rejection, triggering a stress response that makes people want to fill the void with words, any words. Therapists have long exploited this principle. When a patient finishes speaking and the therapist simply waits rather than immediately responding, patients often continue talking, moving from rehearsed answers into more genuine territory. The silence creates a vacuum that pulls out deeper truths. In job interviews, when candidates finish answering and interviewers pause instead of asking the next question, candidates frequently start elaborating, sometimes oversharing or revealing doubts. In sales, after addressing customer objections, salespeople who pause instead of continuing to argue often watch customers work through objections themselves. The key is maintaining comfortable body language during silence. If appearing anxious, it loses power. But when held with calm confidence, steady eye contact, and relaxed posture, it shifts the power dynamic. Law enforcement interrogators are extensively trained in this method. After suspects answer, instead of immediately asking the next question, interrogators simply wait. Suspects, uncomfortable with silence and interpreting it as disbelief, often start explaining further, sometimes contradicting earlier statements. The question, "What would you do?" transforms conversations from abstract discussion into personal commitment. When asking someone what they would do in a specific situation, they're not just sharing opinions but mentally rehearsing action. Neuroscience research shows the brain doesn't clearly distinguish between imagining action and planning actual action. When someone describes what they would do, neural pathways activate similarly to actual preparation, making follow-through more likely. Business consultants use this during strategic planning. Instead of asking, "What should the company do?" they ask, "What would you do if this was your company?" The shift from theoretical to personal investment changes the quality of answers dramatically. People move from safe suggestions to genuine strategic thinking because they've mentally placed themselves in the decision-maker position. Therapists employ this when clients feel stuck. Rather than offering advice directly, asking, "What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?" helps clients access their own wisdom while building commitment to action. The answer comes from them, not imposed externally, creating stronger motivation. In negotiations, this question reveals priorities and values people try to keep hidden. When someone describes what they would do in a scenario, they're exposing their decision-making framework, risk tolerance, and what they genuinely value. Sales professionals use variations like, "What would make this decision easy for you?" which gets prospects to articulate exactly what they need while mentally committing to purchase once those conditions are met. The psychological mechanism involves cognitive consistency. Once someone has publicly stated what they would do, maintaining that position becomes part of their self-concept. Robert Cialdini documented this in Influence, showing how even hypothetical commitments create pressure for consistent follow-through. The key is making the question specific rather than vague. What would you do about climate change? Produces platitudes. What would you do this week if you were serious about it? Produces actionable answers. Mirroring involves subtly matching someone's body language, speech patterns, and energy levels in ways they don't consciously detect, but their unconscious mind interprets as rapport and connection. Humans are naturally drawn to similarity, and when someone moves like us, speaks like us, our ancient brain interprets this as a signal they're part of our tribe, someone safe and trustworthy. Salespeople are trained extensively in this technique. When a customer leans forward, the salesperson leans forward moments later. When a customer crosses their legs, the salesperson mirrors the posture after a brief delay. The delay is crucial. Immediate mirroring appears creepy and obvious, but delayed matching by 2 to 3 seconds flies under conscious radar while registering unconsciously. Research from social psychology demonstrates that people whose body language is mirrored report feeling more understood and connected, even when they can't articulate why. Neuroscientists have identified mirror neurons that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe others performing the same action, creating neural resonance that facilitates empathy. Beyond physical gestures, mirroring extends to speech patterns. If someone speaks slowly and deliberately, matching their pace increases comfort. If they use casual language, formal responses create disconnect. Successful negotiators mirror not just words but breathing patterns, creating deep unconscious synchronization. Therapists use mirroring to build therapeutic alliance, subtly matching clients' posture and energy to create safety. However, there's an ethical consideration. Manipulators and con artists exploit mirroring to create false intimacy, making victims believe they've found someone who truly understands them, only to exploit that trust. The difference between ethical mirroring and manipulation lies in intent, building genuine connection versus engineering false rapport for exploitation. Recognizing when someone mirrors too perfectly, too quickly, can signal manipulation. Strategic information management involves knowing more than revealed, creating asymmetry that provides leverage and protection. Those who share everything they know lose negotiating power and make themselves vulnerable. Intelligence agencies operate on this principle, compartmentalizing information so no single person knows everything. In business negotiations, revealing full knowledge of market conditions or competitor offers eliminates bargaining room. Skilled negotiators ask questions they already know answers to, observing how others respond, whether they're honest or attempt deception. This reveals character while preserving information advantage. The technique appears throughout professional settings. Job candidates who enthusiastically share every idea during interviews give away valuable intellectual property while demonstrating poor judgment about boundaries. Those who share enough to demonstrate competence while holding back proprietary insights show strategic thinking. Lawyers use this constantly. They know far more about their cases than they reveal initially, strategically releasing information to maximize impact. Scientists often have more data than they publish initially, holding back for follow-up studies. In personal relationships, this principle requires more nuance. Healthy relationships involve appropriate vulnerability, but even there, revealing everything immediately prevents relationship development through gradual deepening of trust. Oversharing in new friendships or romantic relationships often creates discomfort and suspicion. The psychological principle involves information asymmetry, creating power dynamics. Those with more knowledge hold advantage in most interactions. However, this can become manipulation when used deceptively. The difference lies between strategic privacy versus active deception. Not volunteering every detail differs from lying when directly asked. Poker players understand this instinctively. Maintaining a poker face means not revealing emotional responses to cards dealt, but it's different from cheating. The skill involves calibrating disclosure to context, sharing enough to build trust while protecting critical information. Silence functions as a positive force rather than mere absence of speech, deployable with devastating effectiveness in negotiations, conflicts, and situations where others expect reaction. Most people experience silence as uncomfortable pressure demanding relief through words, but those who master strategic silence discover it, accomplishes multiple objectives simultaneously. Hostage negotiators are trained never to fill silence immediately after a demand. The silence forces the hostage taker to reconsider, often moderating demands without the negotiator saying anything. Business negotiators use silence after stating their position, resisting the urge to justify or explain further, letting the proposal stand while the other party squirms. Research in communication studies shows that silence creates ambiguity that humans rush to resolve, usually to their own disadvantage. When someone makes an accusation and receives silence rather than defense, it often deflates their aggression because they have nothing to push against. The expected resistance isn't there to validate their attack. The psychology involves deep human discomfort with ambiguity and social pressure to maintain conversational flow. These pressures are strong enough that most people will do almost anything to end silence, including making concessions, revealing secrets, or explaining themselves in ways that weaken their position. Therapists use silence to create space for clients to process emotions and reach insights. Teachers who pause after asking questions get more thoughtful responses because silence creates thinking space. Parents who respond to teenage drama with calm silence often watch conflicts deflate naturally. However, silence can be weaponized through the silent treatment, where communication withdrawal functions as punishment. The difference between strategic silence and manipulative silent treatment lies in intent. Strategic silence gives space for resolution, while silent treatment aims to punish and control. The key to using silence effectively is maintaining comfortable body language during the quiet. When silence is held with calm presence and relaxed posture, it becomes powerful. Anchoring describes how the first piece of information encountered on a subject becomes the reference point for all subsequent judgments, even when that initial anchor is arbitrary. Real estate agents know this instinctively. When showing houses, they often start with an overpriced property that makes the next house seem reasonably priced by comparison, even if that second house is also overpriced. The first house serves as an anchor that shifts perception of value. Research by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated this effect repeatedly. In one famous experiment, people were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the United Nations after spinning a wheel that randomly landed on a number. Their estimates correlated with whatever number the wheel showed, even though they knew the number was random. The anchor affected judgment unconsciously. Salary negotiations demonstrate anchoring powerfully. Whoever states the first number establishes the anchor around which all negotiation occurs. If a job candidate asks for $120,000, negotiations might settle around $110,000. If the employer offers $80,000 first, negotiations might settle around $90,000. The same position, vastly different outcomes, based solely on who anchored first and where. Retailers exploit this constantly. Was $200, now $79, makes $79 seem like an incredible bargain, even when the item was never actually sold for $200. The original price functions as anchor, making the sale price appear dramatically reduced. Wine lists in restaurants place very expensive wines at the top, not expecting to sell many bottles, but anchoring perception so mid-range wines seem reasonable by comparison. Charities use anchoring in donation requests. Suggesting amounts like $500, $250, $100 produces higher average donations than $25, $50, $100 because the initial high anchor shifts what seems reasonable. The mechanism involves the brain using shortcuts. Once an anchor is set, adjustments tend insufficient, meaning the initial number continues influencing final decisions. Past behavior remains the most reliable predictor of future behavior, not because people cannot change, but because meaningful change is rare, and most people operate according to deeply ingrained patterns that repeat consistently across different contexts. Maya Angelou famously said, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time," recognizing that initial behavioral patterns usually continue regardless of promises to change. Psychologists studying personality development find that core behavioral patterns established by early adulthood remain relatively stable throughout life. While people can learn new skills and adapt to circumstances, fundamental responses to stress, conflict, success, and relationships tend to follow established grooves. This is why relationship therapists often ask about a partner's previous relationships. Someone who has cheated in multiple past relationships is statistically likely to cheat again, regardless of promises that this time is different. Someone who has left multiple jobs after conflicts with supervisors will likely repeat that pattern. The way people have historically handled money predicts future financial behavior better than their current statements about fiscal responsibility. Criminal justice systems rely heavily on this principle, which is why criminal history factors into sentencing and parole decisions. Recidivism rates remain high because behavioral patterns are deeply entrenched and difficult to change without intensive intervention. Hiring managers who ignore a candidate's job history, showing frequent short tenures or conflicts, often regret it when those patterns repeat. The psychological mechanism involves both neurological grooves and learned behavioral strategies. The brain creates neural pathways that become increasingly efficient with repetition, making established responses automatic, while new responses require conscious effort. From an evolutionary perspective, behavioral patterns that have worked previously tend to be repeated because they've proven successful from the individual's viewpoint, even if they're destructive to relationships or long-term goals. However, this principle requires nuanced application. People can change, particularly with significant life events, genuine self-awareness, or effective therapy. The question isn't whether change is possible, but whether it's likely. In practical terms, historical patterns provide better predictive data than current presentations or promises. Arguments are rarely won through superior logic or evidence alone, but through the ability to define the frame within which the argument takes place, establishing which questions are relevant, which standards apply, and what constitutes victory. Political debates demonstrate this constantly. When discussing immigration, those framing it as border security create different assumptions than those framing it as human rights. Neither frame is objectively correct, but each frame determines which facts seem relevant, which emotions are activated, and which policies appear reasonable. George Lakoff's work on framing showed how conservatives successfully framed tax relief, creating a metaphor of taxes as burden requiring relief, while liberals failed to establish alternative frames like tax investment for society. Once the relief frame was established, debates occurred within that framework rather than challenging it. Lawyers understand framing as central to their work. During jury selection and opening statements, they're establishing the frame through which jurors will interpret all subsequent evidence. Is this a case about personal responsibility or corporate negligence, about an unfortunate accident or reckless disregard? The same evidence appears completely different depending on which frame jurors accept. Business negotiations involve constant framing battles. Is this discussion about fair market value or strategic partnership, about quarterly costs or long-term investment? Whoever establishes the dominant frame shapes what information seems relevant and what compromises appear reasonable. Skillful negotiators recognize when opponents are trying to establish unfavorable frames and actively reframe rather than arguing within the imposed framework. In personal relationships, framing determines whether conflicts are about specific behaviors or fundamental character. Someone framing a disagreement as "you always prioritize work over family" creates a different discussion than "I'd like to talk about our schedule for next week." The former frame makes resolution nearly impossible because it's about unchangeable character rather than adjustable behavior. Cognitive linguistics research explains that frames are mental structures shaping how we understand situations. They're not neutral containers for facts but active organizers of meaning. Defending against unwanted framing requires recognizing when frames are being imposed rather than naturally describing reality. Human insecurity manifests most clearly not in obvious self-doubt, but in excessive attempts to prove the opposite, in overcompensation that signals exactly what someone fears they lack. The loudest voice in the room claiming expertise often knows the least. The person constantly name-dropping and ensuring everyone knows their accomplishments usually feels most fraudulent inside. The individual aggressively asserting dominance typically feels most insecure about their position. Psychologists have documented this as reaction formation, where people adopt behaviors opposite to their true feelings as a defense mechanism. The psychology is straightforward. People build defensive shells around their most vulnerable places, turning insecurity into aggression, fear of inadequacy into displays of superiority. Someone truly secure in their knowledge speaks with quiet confidence, comfortable saying, "I don't know," when appropriate. Someone insecure about their knowledge lectures constantly, unable to admit any gap because each admission feels like exposing the fraud they fear they are. In business settings, the executive who must remind everyone of their title and accomplishments in every meeting usually feels most threatened. Secure leaders allow their competence to speak through results rather than constant self-promotion. The colleague who aggressively puts others down is typically trying to elevate themselves relative to those they feel threatened by. Wealth provides stark examples. Old money tends toward understatement because security in their status allows restraint. New money often displays wealth conspicuously because insecurity about whether they truly belong drives compensation through visible signals. In relationships, overcompensation manifests as controlling behavior. The partner who monitors phones constantly, demands access to passwords, and questions every interaction usually feels insecure about their own worth and fears abandonment. The jealousy and control are compensation for deep insecurity. Social media amplified overcompensation dramatically. People posting constant images of perfect lives are often compensating for feeling their actual lives are inadequate. Research shows that genuinely confident people rarely need to assert their confidence because it's evident in their behavior. They're comfortable with uncertainty, can acknowledge mistakes, and don't require constant validation. The practical application involves reading these signals when assessing people in professional or personal contexts. The yes ladder technique leverages human desire for consistency by securing agreement to a series of small, easy questions before presenting the larger request, creating momentum of agreement that makes refusing the ultimate ask psychologically uncomfortable. Sales training teaches this as fundamental. A car salesperson doesn't immediately ask, "Will you buy this car?" Instead, they build a ladder. "You want reliable transportation, right?" "Yes." "And fuel efficiency matters to you?" "Yes." "You prefer vehicles with good safety ratings?" "Yes." After establishing this pattern of agreement, the actual purchase request feels like natural continuation rather than a leap. The psychological mechanism involves commitment and consistency biases documented extensively by Robert Cialdini in Influence. Once people say yes to something, even something trivial, they begin seeing themselves as the kind of person who agrees with this type of request. Each subsequent yes reinforces that self-concept, making saying no feel like contradicting themselves. Charities employ this systematically. They might start by asking if someone cares about children's welfare. Most say yes because saying no makes them appear callous. Then they ask if people who can afford to help should do so again. Most agree. Finally, they ask for a donation, and refusing now feels inconsistent with previous affirmative responses. Political campaigns use yes ladders during canvassing. Instead of immediately asking for votes or donations, volunteers establish agreement on several issues first, building a pattern where saying yes feels natural. Business meetings often use yes ladders when presenting proposals. Starting with uncontroversial points everyone agrees with before introducing the actual proposal makes opposition feel like rejecting everything previously agreed to. The sequence matters enormously. Each yes should be genuine, uncontroversial, and truly build toward the final request. Defending against yes ladders requires recognizing the pattern. When someone asks a series of obvious questions seeking agreement on general principles, they're likely building toward a specific request. At that point, evaluating the final request independently rather than feeling momentum from previous yeses prevents manipulation. Each decision deserves independent evaluation regardless of what was agreed to moments before. One of the most disorienting responses to aggression is unexpected calm, refusing to match anger with anger or threat with threat, instead responding to hostility with composed serenity that disarms aggressive people by eliminating the expected escalation dynamic. Martial arts philosophy teaches this principle. Aikido, in particular, is built around redirecting opponents' energy rather than meeting force with force. When someone attacks and the response is fluid redirection rather than solid resistance, the attacker's momentum works against them. This principle extends beyond physical confrontation to verbal and emotional aggression. When someone approaches with anger or intimidation expecting defensive response or counter-aggression, responding with genuine calm breaks their script. The anger has nowhere to land. Customer service professionals are trained in de-escalation through calm responses. When angry customers yell, representatives responding with steadily calm voices and non-defensive listening often watch anger dissipate because lack of resistance removes fuel for the fire. Research in conflict resolution shows that aggression typically escalates through reciprocal patterns. Someone raises their voice, the other raises theirs, and the cycle intensifies. Breaking the pattern through unexpected calm disrupts the cycle entirely. The aggressor, prepared for fight, finds themselves suddenly in a situation where fighting looks unreasonable because the other person isn't fighting back. The psychological mechanism involves how anger is sustained. Aggressive people often seek validation for their anger through others' reactions. When someone responds defensively or with counter-aggression, it confirms that the initial anger was justified. But when someone responds with calm that neither validates nor combats the anger, it forces the aggressor to confront whether their intensity is really warranted. In workplace conflicts, managers who respond to aggressive subordinates with calm, measured responses rather than matching their energy often see rapid de-escalation. The key is genuine calm, not suppressed rage masquerading as calm. People detect false calm, and it can escalate situations. Authentic calm comes from genuinely not being threatened by the aggression, recognizing it as the aggressor's problem rather than an actual threat. First impressions form within seconds and prove notoriously difficult to change, operating through rapid judgments based on minimal information that then filter all subsequent information. The brain essentially decides quickly and then looks for confirmation rather than truly remaining open. Research by Princeton psychologists showed people form impressions of competence, trustworthiness, and likability within 1/10 of a second of seeing a face. Longer exposure doesn't change these impressions significantly, it only increases confidence in them. This happens because the brain uses heuristics to process overwhelming social information, creating shortcuts allowing quick assessment. Malcolm Gladwell explored this in Blink, documenting how snap judgments powerfully shape outcomes from hiring decisions to romantic attraction. Clothing choices, posture, eye contact quality, handshake firmness, speaking pace, and initial words all contribute to first impression formation more than people typically acknowledge. Business consultants advising on presentations emphasize that how someone walks to the front of the room, their posture while standing, and their first sentence often determine audience receptivity more than the content that follows. Politicians invest enormous resources in image consulting because first impressions from television appearances shape voter perceptions more than policy details. Job interviews illustrate this clearly. Research consistently shows that interviewers form opinions within minutes, often before candidates have said anything substantial, based on handshake, posture, dress, and initial small talk. The remainder of the interview is largely confirmation bias, looking for evidence supporting the initial impression. Candidates who understand this invest effort in perfecting those first moments: professional attire appropriate to company culture, confident posture, firm but not aggressive handshake, warm eye contact, and prepared small talk that establishes likability before substantive discussion begins. Dating contexts show similar patterns. First date impressions form rapidly and filter subsequent perception. Restaurant servers know that initial greeting affects tips more than service quality during the meal. For creating positive first impressions ethically, the key involves genuine preparation rather than deceptive performance. Human memory architecture creates predictable patterns where information encountered first and information encountered last are remembered far better than anything in the middle, and understanding this primacy and recency effect allows strategic positioning of important information for maximum impact. Psychologists have documented this through countless studies. When people hear a list of words and later try to recall them, words from the beginning and end are recalled far more frequently than words from the middle. The primacy effect occurs because early information gets more rehearsal and attention, transferring more effectively into long-term memory. The recency effect happens because later information is still present in working memory when recall begins. Applied to presentations, this means opening and closing carry disproportionate weight. Speakers who understand this place their strongest arguments at the beginning to establish frame and at the end to leave lasting impression, while burying weaker but necessary points in the middle where they'll be forgotten. Teachers applying this principle structure lessons with important concepts at start and conclusion, using the middle for practice. Advertisers design commercials with memorable openings and closings, while the middle contains required disclosures that most viewers don't retain. Sales presentations follow similar structure, opening with compelling benefits, placing price discussions in the middle when possible, and closing with strong call to action. Job interviews demonstrate this effect clearly. What candidates say in first minutes and last minutes before leaving disproportionately influences hiring decisions compared to substance of answers during the middle portion. Understanding this, prepared candidates ensure their strongest qualifications and most compelling stories are positioned at the interview's beginning and end. Legal presentations follow the same principle. Attorneys know jurors will remember opening statements and closing arguments far better than the often lengthy testimony in between. In written communication, primacy and recency effects manifest through readers remembering introductions and conclusions while often skimming middle sections. Business proposals bury unfavorable terms in middle sections while highlighting benefits in openings and conclusions. The strategic application involves conscious information architecture. The human brain experiences curiosity as genuine itch demanding to be scratched, a neurological state of tension arising when perceiving a gap between what's known and what's desired to be known, and this uncomfortable tension compels seeking resolution with urgency. Creating curiosity gaps deliberately means opening loops that people feel psychologically compelled to close beginning stories without revealing endings, raising questions without immediately providing answers, hinting at information without full disclosure. Television shows master this with cliffhangers. When episodes end with unresolved tension like shocking revelations or unanswered questions, audiences are left in psychological discomfort. Their brains continue processing the unfinished storyline, making them eager to watch the next episode. This is why binge watching is so addictive. The moment a show leaves something incomplete, the mind struggles to let go until closure is achieved. Marketers and advertisers leverage curiosity gaps to capture attention. Headlines like "The Secret to Success That No One Talks About" trigger the brain's need for closure, compelling people to click. Sales strategies often include open-ended offers like "limited time deal, find out more inside," making customers feel they need to continue engaging to get full information. The psychological mechanism involves how dopamine circuits respond to anticipation of information, creating pleasurable tension that motivates information-seeking behavior. The Zeigarnik effect, named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, describes how people remember unfinished tasks better than completed ones. The unresolved nature creates tension in memory systems, creating cognitive itch, keeping the unresolved matter active. In conversations, curiosity gaps appear when someone says, "Remind me to tell you the rest of that story next time," or "I have some ideas about that, but let's pick it up later." These create mental open loops, keeping the speaker present in others' minds between interactions. The key to using curiosity gaps effectively is creating genuine interest rather than manipulative clickbait. The gap should promise information people actually want rather than deceiving them about content. One of the most powerful ways to neutralize manipulation is naming it explicitly, calling out the technique being used with calm directness that forces the manipulator to either acknowledge what they're doing or abandon the tactic. Most manipulation relies on operating beneath conscious awareness and loses power the moment it's dragged into the light. When developing courage to say things like, "I notice you're trying to make me feel guilty for setting a boundary," or "It seems like you're presenting a false dilemma here," the dynamic fundamentally changes. The manipulator can no longer pretend their behavior is innocent or unconscious. They're forced to either defend an indefensible position or shift to more honest interaction. The psychology involves how manipulation works through indirection and plausible deniability, creating effects that feel spontaneous rather than calculated. When naming the technique explicitly, plausible deniability is removed. In workplace contexts, employees who calmly state, "This feels like a bait-and-switch," or "I notice the goalposts keep moving," often watch manipulative managers back down because the behavior has been made visible. In personal relationships, naming manipulation can either transform the relationship by forcing honesty or end it by revealing the relationship only functioned when manipulation went unacknowledged. The key is doing this without accusation, simply stating observations as facts. "When I set a boundary, you respond by withdrawing affection," is more effective than "you're manipulating me." Understanding common manipulation tactics makes naming them easier: guilt-tripping, gaslighting, moving goalposts, playing victim, triangulation. Once these patterns become recognizable, naming them becomes natural. The quality of questions determines the quality of thinking provoked. When learning to craft questions that force people beyond surface responses into genuine reflection, the ability to elevate conversations, reveal character, and influence thinking in ways direct statements never could is gained. Deep questions can't be answered with rehearsed responses or quick reactions. Questions like, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" or "What belief do you hold that you can't fully defend?" These work by bypassing social autopilot and engaging actual reasoning systems that most people rarely activate. The psychological mechanism involves how good questions create cognitive work that people feel compelled to complete, similar to how an unfinished melody creates tension demanding resolution. Socratic method relies entirely on this. Instead of telling students answers, asking questions that force them to reason their way to conclusions creates deeper understanding. In business consulting, effective consultants rarely tell clients what to do. Instead, they ask questions like, what would success look like in 3 years? That force clients to articulate their own solutions, which they're then far more committed to implementing. Therapists use this constantly. Rather than giving advice, asking, what do you already know about this situation that you're not admitting to yourself, often produces breakthroughs. In everyday conversations, most people default to statements rather than questions. Learning to lead with genuine curiosity transforms interactions. The key is asking questions you don't already know the answer to, questions that genuinely seek understanding rather than disguised statements. Future pacing guides someone through detailed mental simulation of a positive future outcome, having them imagine what they'll see, hear, feel when they've achieved a particular goal or made a decision. This creates psychological investment and motivation that makes the imagined future feel more real and desirable. When using future pacing effectively, not just describing a possibility, but helping someone create a vivid mental experience of that possibility, asking questions like, imagine it 6 months from now and you've already done this. What does that feel like? The psychological mechanism involves how the brain processes imagined experiences using many of the same neural circuits as actual experiences, creating emotional responses that feel genuine even though they're entirely simulated. When someone has imagined a positive future in detail, they become more motivated to make it real. Sales professionals use this extensively. Instead of describing product benefits, they guide prospects through experiencing themselves using the product successfully. Imagine 3 months from now you're using this system. Your team is more productive, you're leaving work on time. What does your typical day look like? This creates emotional connection to the future state. Life coaches use future pacing to help clients overcome obstacles. When someone feels stuck, guiding them to vividly imagine their life after making a change helps build motivation and clarity. Political campaigns use this in messaging, imagine a future where, followed by detailed description of positive outcomes. The technique works because humans are largely driven by imagined futures rather than present realities. The story someone tells themselves about what will happen shapes behavior more than objective analysis of current circumstances. Social hierarchies exist in every group, operating through countless subtle signals that communicate relative status and power so efficiently that most people respond unconsciously. When learning to read these signals deliberately, X-ray vision into power dynamics of any room is gained, seeing who actually holds influence versus who holds formal authority. These signals include who interrupts whom, who holds eye contact and who breaks it first, whose jokes get laughed at regardless of quality, who speaks first and last in meetings, whose time is treated as more valuable, who touches whom and in what contexts, whose physical space gets respected versus invaded. Anthropologists and primatologists have documented these patterns across human cultures, and even in primate groups, basic status signaling behaviors are deeply rooted in evolutionary history. In business settings, the person who arrives last to meetings but isn't criticized often holds more power than their title suggests. The person whose suggestions get immediately adopted while others' suggestions get debated likely has informal authority beyond their position. The person who can touch others casually hand on shoulder, pat on back, while others don't reciprocate is signaling and having acknowledged higher status. Political interactions reveal status through who stands where, who sits at head of table, who walks through doors first. These aren't random, they're carefully negotiated and maintained status displays. Understanding these signals allows more effective navigation of organizational politics. Recognizing who holds real power versus who holds titles prevents wasting effort trying to influence the wrong people. How criticism is responded to reveals more about strategic sophistication than almost any other behavior. When learning to treat criticism not as attack to be defended against, but as leverage to be used for one's own purposes, a potentially negative situation transforms into opportunity for demonstrating confidence and gaining information about the critic. When someone criticizes, the sophisticated response is often to thank them for feedback, acknowledge whatever limited truth might exist, and then either ask clarifying questions that force them to be more specific or simply move on without defensive explanation, treating criticism as interesting information rather than threat to self-concept. The psychological mechanism involves understanding that defensive reactions to criticism often signal insecurity and give critics power, while confident engagement demonstrates secure self-esteem and often leaves critics uncertain whether their attack landed. In professional settings, when receiving critical feedback in meetings, responding with, "That's a good point, can you elaborate on what specifically concerns you?" forces the critic to move from vague attack to concrete concerns that can actually be addressed. It also signals confidence. Someone secure in their competence can hear criticism without becoming defensive. In personal relationships, when someone criticizes choices, responding with genuine curiosity, "Help me understand what you're worried about," often reveals the real concern beneath the criticism, which is frequently not about the stated issue, but about feeling unheard or unvalued. The key is separating self-worth from others' evaluations. When self-esteem is genuinely independent of external validation, criticism becomes information rather than threat. Human psychology is wired to expect certain interaction patterns. When someone approaches with hostility, they're mentally prepared for defensiveness, counter-aggression, or withdrawal, which means responding with a genuine, unexpected compliment creates cognitive dissonance so profound that it often completely disarms their hostility and resets the interaction on entirely different terms. When sincerely complimenting someone who's attacking, finding something real and specific to appreciate about them or their position, even as they're being hostile, multiple things are accomplished. Strength is demonstrated by showing lack of threat. The expected script is broken, forcing recalibration. It becomes psychologically difficult to continue attack because reciprocity norms make sustained aggression after receiving compliment feel inappropriate, and it often reveals their hostility was driven by insecurity or feeling unappreciated, which the compliment directly addresses. Business negotiations sometimes show this principle. When a partner becomes aggressive, responding with, "I have to say, I really appreciate how thoroughly you've prepared for this discussion. The level of detail you've brought is impressive," can completely change the tone. The person was prepared for fight, not recognition, and unexpected acknowledgement often softens their approach. In workplace conflicts, when a colleague attacks ideas in a meeting, responding with, "You always ask the tough questions that need to be asked, and I value that even when it's uncomfortable," acknowledges their contribution while refusing to engage in hostility. The psychological mechanism involves how unexpected positive responses create confusion and force people to update mental models. The key word is genuine. The compliment must be real and specific, not obviously manipulative flattery, or it backfires. One of the most effective but ego-challenging influence techniques involves planting ideas in ways that allow others to believe they thought of them first. Understanding that people are far more committed to ideas they believe originated with them than to ideas they recognize as coming from outside. When learning to suggest ideas indirectly through questions, partial thoughts, and strategic hints rather than direct proposals, situations are created where others complete the thoughts and present them as their own insights. While this requires swallowing need for recognition, it results in far more effective implementation because the person now has ego investment in making their idea succeed. The technique works through careful sequencing where relevant problems are raised without proposing solutions, questions are asked that guide thinking in particular directions, analogies from other contexts are shared that suggest approaches without explicitly recommending them. Management consultants use this extensively. Rather than telling executives what to do, which creates resistance, they facilitate discussions through strategic questions that lead executives to arrive at desired conclusions themselves. The executives then champion these ideas as their own, ensuring commitment and follow-through. In personal relationships, when wanting a partner to make a change, directly asking often creates resistance. But casually mentioning observations, asking questions about their goals, sharing relevant articles without explicit connection, these plant seeds that often grow into their idea for change. The psychology involves reactance. People resist feeling told what to think or do, preferring autonomy. When ideas feel self-generated, there's no reactance, only ownership. This requires genuine long-term thinking and ego security, being willing to watch others receive credit for insights that originated elsewhere. Liars expect certain responses when they lie, typically either belief and acceptance or direct challenge and accusation. Neither of these responses is as effective as strategic silence that creates uncertainty about whether they're believed and forces them to continue talking in ways that often expose their deception. When someone tells something suspected to be false, the sophisticated response is often to simply pause, maintain neutral eye contact, and wait without confirming belief or challenging their story. creating an ambiguous situation where they're uncertain whether their lie succeeded and often feel compelled to elaborate, add details, or explain further in ways that create inconsistencies or reveal information they hadn't intended to share. The psychological mechanism involves the discomfort that liars feel with uncertainty about whether their deception worked, combined with the tendency of liars to over-explain and add unnecessary details as they try to make their story more convincing, often creating contradictions or implausible elements that reveal the deception more clearly than direct interrogation would. Law enforcement interrogators are trained extensively in this technique. After a suspect gives an answer that seems false, instead of immediately calling it a lie or asking follow-up questions, the interrogator simply waits in silence, maintaining steady eye contact. The suspect, interpreting silence as skepticism and feeling pressure to convince, often continues talking and reveals inconsistencies. In personal relationships, when a partner tells a story that doesn't quite add up, the instinct is to immediately confront. But strategic silence, just looking at them calmly and waiting, often results in them elaborating without prompting, and the elaboration frequently contains details that contradict the original story. The key is genuine poker face, not showing belief or disbelief, just neutral attention. The human brain is wired to place higher value on things that are rare or limited, a cognitive bias so powerful that it often overrides rational assessment of whether something is actually needed or wanted, triggering decision-making based on fear of missing out rather than genuine evaluation of utility or desirability. When learning to use scarcity deliberately, urgency and motivation can be created by framing opportunities, resources, or time as limited, making people feel they need to act now or lose their chance. This manifests through explicit deadlines, limited quantities, exclusive access, or any framing emphasizing the opportunity won't last. Retailers are masters of this. Only 2 left in stock or sale ends tonight creates artificial urgency driving impulse purchases. Black Friday and flash sales exploit scarcity through time limitation, creating buying frenzies around products people wouldn't urgently need otherwise. Luxury brands use scarcity through exclusivity, limited production runs, waiting lists, invitation-only events. The scarcity itself becomes part of the value proposition. The psychological mechanism involves loss aversion. People are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve equivalent gains, so the possibility of losing an opportunity feels more urgent than the possibility of gaining something of equal value. Additionally, scarcity signals social proof and quality. If something is rare, it must be because others value it highly, creating a feedback loop where scarcity makes things seem more desirable, which makes them actually more scarce. Real estate agents use scarcity constantly. Another buyer is looking at this property today, creates pressure to decide quickly. Job offers sometimes come with tight deadlines. We need to know by Friday, creating urgency that prevents candidates from fully considering options. However, ethical use of scarcity involves actual limitation rather than manufactured artificial scarcity to manipulate decisions. Truth has a natural economy to it, a confidence that allows it to be stated simply without excessive justification or elaborate detail, while lies often betray themselves through the very effort their tellers make to ensure they're believed, resulting in over-explaining that adds unnecessary details, preemptive defenses against questions that haven't been asked, and an overall quality of trying too hard that truth never needs. When learning to listen for over-explanation as a deception signal, the ability to spot lies is gained not through catching people in contradictions, but through recognizing the excessive effort and detail that reveals someone's anxiety about being believed. Liars tend to add specific details they think will make their story more credible, explain aspects that wouldn't need explanation if the story were true, and generally treat their story as something that needs to be sold rather than simply stated. Psychologists studying deception have found that truth-tellers tend to be less detailed and organized because they're retrieving actual memories rather than constructing narratives. Liars, knowing they're lying, overcompensate by creating more polished, detailed stories than genuine accounts typically contain. In law enforcement, investigators are trained to notice when suspects provide more detail than requested or explain things that weren't questioned. Where were you Friday night? Truth. At home. Lie. I was at home, definitely at home. I was watching TV in my living room. I think it was around 8 p.m. when I got home. The excessive detail signals effort to convince rather than simple recall. In personal relationships, when asking a partner about their day and receiving an unusually detailed account of mundane activities, especially activities that serve as alibis, the detail itself can be a red flag. The key is calibrating to the person's baseline. Some people naturally provide more detail than others. But when someone's level of detail suddenly increases dramatically for specific topics, that shift itself is meaningful. The most powerful tool for extracting information from others is often not clever questioning, but simple silence maintained after they've finished speaking, creating an expectation that more should be said, and a social pressure that compels most people to fill the void by elaborating, clarifying, or revealing information they hadn't intended to share. When someone finishes making a statement or answering a question, and rather than immediately responding or asking another question, simply continuing to look at them with patient attention, a vacuum is created that feels uncomfortable, and that most people reflexively fill by continuing to talk, often moving from prepared responses into more revealing territory. The technique works because humans are deeply social creatures with powerful drives to avoid awkward silences and to ensure they've been understood, drives so strong that extended silence after speaking feels like failure or rejection and triggers additional explanation. Therapists are extensively trained in this method. After a client finishes answering a question, rather than immediately moving forward, the therapist simply waits, maintaining attentive presence. Clients, feeling the need to fill the silence, often continue talking and reveal thoughts and feelings that wouldn't emerge through direct questioning. Journalists use this technique in interviews. After someone gives an answer, the journalist maintains eye contact and waits, and sources frequently elaborate beyond what they plan to share. In business negotiations, when someone states their position and is met with attentive silence rather than immediate response, they often start explaining, justifying, or even moderating their position without any pressure beyond the silence itself. The key is projecting genuine interest during the silence. This isn't cold or hostile silence, but warm, patient, attentive silence that suggests, "I'm listening, I'm interested, please continue." One of the most effective ways to influence decisions is to present limited options that all lead to outcomes favored while creating the illusion of choice and autonomy, essentially constraining the decision space to exclude possibilities wanted avoided. When framing decisions by presenting 2 or 3 specific options, rather than leaving the choice open-ended, enormous influence over the outcome is gained because most people will choose from the options presented rather than generating new alternatives. If all the options presented serve one's interests, regardless of which one is chosen, victory is assured. The technique works by leveraging the way people process decisions through frames that are provided to them rather than generating comprehensive alternatives from scratch, combined with the psychological satisfaction people get from feeling they made a choice even when that choice was constrained. This manifests in everyday situations from parenting where asking, "Do you want to wear the red shirt or the blue shirt?" rather than "What do you want to wear?" constrains options while maintaining perceived autonomy. In sales, asking, "Would you prefer morning or afternoon delivery?" rather than "Do you want to buy this?" assumes the purchase and only questions timing. Real estate agents show specific properties carefully selected to guide buyers toward particular choices, while buyers feel they're independently evaluating options. In business negotiations, presenting options like, "We could do option A with these terms or option B with these terms," frames the discussion around choosing between presented alternatives rather than exploring entirely different approaches. The psychology involves bounded rationality and the cognitive cost of generating options. It's easier to choose from presented alternatives than to think creatively about what other possibilities might exist. Recognizing when being presented with artificially limited options requires stepping back and asking what other possibilities exist beyond what's being presented. Groupthink is the insidious process by which groups prioritize consensus and harmony over critical evaluation of alternatives, leading to poor decisions that no individual member would have made on their own, but that emerge from the group dynamic of not wanting to rock the boat or challenge emerging consensus. When learning to recognize early warning signs of groupthink, protection from being swept along into bad decisions is gained by noticing patterns like premature consensus, where agreement comes too easily without genuine debate, pressure on dissenters where people who raise concerns are subtly or overtly discouraged, illusions of unanimity where silence is interpreted as agreement, and collective rationalization where the group develops explanations for ignoring external warnings or contrary information. The psychological mechanism involves the way social needs for belonging and acceptance can override rational evaluation, combined with the diffusion of responsibility that occurs in groups where individuals assume others have thought critically about the decision even when no one actually has. Historical disasters from Bay of Pigs invasion to Challenger explosion have been attributed to groupthink dynamics where intelligent people made catastrophic decisions because group consensus became more important than critical analysis. In business settings, groupthink appears when teams rush to agreement on strategies without proper debate, when dissenting opinions are dismissed as not being team players, when groups develop shared illusions about their capabilities that contradict external evidence. Signs include excessive confidence, stereotyping of outsiders, pressure to conform, and self-censorship, where people with doubts don't voice them to avoid disrupting harmony. Preventing groupthink requires deliberately creating space for dissent. Some organizations assign devil's advocate roles to ensure opposing viewpoints are heard. Some leaders explicitly reward people who raise concerns. The key is recognizing that harmony and quick consensus aren't always positive. Sometimes they signal that critical thinking has been suppressed. Human beings are not primarily rational creatures who make decisions based on data and logic, but rather storytelling animals who understand the world through narratives that create emotional resonance and meaning, which means that the person who can embed their ideas within compelling stories will always be more persuasive than the person who relies on facts and statistics alone. When learning to persuade through storytelling, the way the brain is actually wired to process and remember information is tapped into, using narrative structure with characters, conflicts, and resolutions that engage emotion and imagination in ways that bare facts never can. A story about a specific person who faced a particular challenge and overcame it through a certain approach will be more memorable and motivating than any amount of aggregate data about success rates, because stories activate multiple regions of the brain, including those involved in sensory experience and emotion, essentially allowing the listener to simulate the experience rather than simply processing abstract information. Research in neuroscience shows that when people hear stories, their brains light up not just in language processing areas, but throughout regions associated with the experiences being described. If a story involves motion, motor cortex activates. If it involves emotions, emotional centers activate. Businesses that understand this craft narratives about their origins, their customers' successes, their mission and values. Apple's marketing rarely focuses on technical specifications. It tells stories about creativity and innovation. Political campaigns are fundamentally about storytelling. Candidates present narratives about national identity, shared challenges, and aspirational futures far more than policy details. Successful teachers know that concepts taught through stories stick with students far longer than concepts taught through abstract explanation. In personal persuasion, when trying to convince someone to take a particular action, sharing a story about someone who took that action and benefited works better than listing reasons why the action is logical. In a world where people expect transactional interactions, competitive dynamics, and strategic self-interest, responding with unexpected kindness and generosity can be one of the most disruptive and powerful moves available, creating confusion and goodwill that opens doors no amount of conventional strategy could unlock. When helping someone who expected competition, when being generous to someone who was prepared for transactional engagement, when showing kindness to someone who anticipated hostility, cognitive dissonance is created that forces them to completely revise their understanding of who you are and what your motives might be, often resulting in loyalty and reciprocity far beyond what the initial kindness cost. The technique works by violating expectations in a positive direction, which creates a memorable experience and triggers powerful reciprocity norms. But it also works because genuine unexpected kindness is so rare that it stands out dramatically and creates a story that gets repeated, building reputation in ways that calculated networking never achieves. Business examples exist where competitors helped each other during crises, creating relationships that later led to partnerships or mutual support that pure self-interest would never have produced. During natural disasters or market crashes, businesses that helped competitors rather than trying to capitalize on their weakness often built goodwill that translated into long-term advantage. In professional relationships, helping someone without being asked and without expecting anything in return creates debt that may never be called in explicitly, but that often returns in unexpected ways: recommendations, introductions, support during difficult times. The psychology involves the way humans are wired to reciprocate both kindness and hostility, but with kindness having a particularly powerful effect when it's unexpected because it suggests strength and abundance rather than need or strategy. However, the kindness must be genuine, not strategic manipulation disguised as kindness. People eventually detect when kindness is performative calculation rather than authentic generosity. Formal authority and actual leadership are often disconnected, with real influence frequently belonging to those who command presence and respect through behavior rather than title. When learning to lead without authority, the ability to shape outcomes and guide groups regardless of official position is gained. Owning a room means entering with calm confidence, contributing value rather than just opinions, asking questions that focus discussion, summarizing and synthesizing what others say in ways that guide interpretation, demonstrating competence through actions rather than assertions, and generally behaving like someone who expects to be taken seriously without needing to demand it. The technique works because groups naturally organize around whoever provides the most value and clarity, regardless of hierarchy. When consistently demonstrating judgment, insight, and ability to move things forward, people defer even without formal power. In business meetings, the person who listens carefully, asks clarifying questions, identifies the real issue beneath surface problems, and proposes concrete next steps often ends up directing outcomes regardless of their title. They're not trying to dominate conversation, but rather adding value in ways that make them indispensable to progress. In community organizations and volunteer settings, formal positions matter less than who actually does the work and provides vision. The person who takes initiative, follows through on commitments, and helps others succeed naturally becomes a leader whether or not they hold an official title. The psychology involves how social hierarchies form through competence signaling and provision of group benefits, with leadership naturally flowing to those who help the group achieve its goals. The key to leading without authority is focusing on contribution rather than recognition. Instead of trying to be the person who makes decisions, be the person who provides clarity that helps others make better decisions. The spotlight effect is the psychological phenomenon where people dramatically overestimate how much others notice and remember about them, operating under the illusion that they're the center of attention when in reality, most people are too focused on themselves to pay sustained attention to anyone else. When understanding this effect, it can be exploited by recognizing that the embarrassment and self-consciousness that hold most people back are based on an illusion, that mistakes and awkward moments are far less memorable to others than they feel to the person experiencing them, which frees taking risks and trying things that others avoid due to fear of judgment. The mechanism involves the way we experience our own behavior from the inside with full awareness of thoughts and intentions, creating a vivid experience that we mistakenly assume is equally vivid to observers who actually only see the surface and are distracted by their own concerns. This means that the bold move feared to make someone look foolish will likely be forgotten by observers within minutes, while the decision to hold back will cost opportunities that no one else even noticed existed. Research in social psychology demonstrates this repeatedly. In one famous study, participants wore embarrassing t-shirts and estimated that half the people in a room would notice. In reality, less than 25% noticed. In another study, people who made mistakes in presentations vastly overestimated how much the audience noticed or cared. The practical application means calibrating self-consciousness to reality rather than imagination. Most anxious thoughts about how others are judging are simply incorrect. Others aren't paying that much attention. This frees action despite feeling exposed because exposure is mostly in one's own mind. Public speakers who understand this worry less about small mistakes because they know the audience won't remember them. Entrepreneurs who grasp this principle launch imperfect products because they realize most people won't notice the flaws they're obsessing over. The spotlight effect creates unnecessary paralysis that understanding can break. Skilled manipulators often reveal themselves through their pattern of asking probing questions that seem like normal conversation, but are actually systematic information gathering designed to find vulnerabilities, boundaries, values, and pressure points that can later be exploited. When learning to recognize this pattern, notice that certain people ask an unusual number of questions about background, relationships, finances, fears, and desires, but they rarely offer equivalent information about themselves, creating an asymmetry that positions them to understand you far better than you understand them. These questions often feel flattering because they signal interest and attention, making you feel valued and understood, but the sophisticated observer notices that the emotional connection being created is strategic rather than spontaneous, designed to lower defenses and create a sense of intimacy that can be leveraged later. Con artists and sociopaths are particularly skilled at this technique. They ask about childhood, about past relationships, about what makes you happy or sad, about your dreams and disappointments. They seem fascinated by your answers, asking follow-up questions and remembering details. But if you pay attention, you realize they've revealed almost nothing substantive about themselves. When they do share information, it's often vague or unverifiable, designed to create false intimacy without actual vulnerability. In business contexts, manipulators gather information about budgets, decision-making processes, alternative options, deadlines, and personal pressures. They use this information to time their asks strategically and frame offers in ways that exploit what they've learned. The psychology involves how manipulators study their targets like predators studying prey, gathering information systematically while revealing little, and how most people are so flattered by attention that they don't notice the asymmetry or question the motives behind the curiosity. The defense involves tracking information flow, noticing when conversations are consistently one-sided, when someone knows far more about you than you know about them, and being willing to explicitly address the imbalance. Human connection often happens most naturally when people operate at similar energy levels. When learning to read and match someone's energy, whether that's high excitement or quiet contemplation, fast-paced urgency or relaxed reflection, instant rapport is created that makes them feel understood and comfortable in your presence. The technique involves paying attention to the pace, volume, and emotional intensity of how someone is showing up, and adjusting your own presentation to harmonize with theirs rather than clashing or creating dissonance. When someone is speaking quickly and enthusiastically, matching that energy makes them feel met and validated, while responding with slow, careful consideration can feel dismissive or disconnected. Conversely, when someone is speaking quietly and carefully, matching their thoughtful pace creates safety, while bringing high energy can feel overwhelming or insensitive. The psychology involves the way humans unconsciously interpret energy matching as a signal of attunement and understanding, a sign of being on the same wavelength, while energy mismatches create a subtle sense of disconnection or being misunderstood even when the content of what's being said is perfectly reasonable. Sales professionals are trained in this extensively. They learn to calibrate their energy to match prospects. If the prospect is analytical and methodical, they slow down and provide detailed information. If the prospect is enthusiastic and quick deciding, they match that pace and energy. Therapists use this principle as well, matching clients' emotional states initially to create safety before potentially guiding them toward different states. Job interviewers often unconsciously favor candidates whose energy matches theirs, which is why understanding the company culture and energy level before interviews can be advantageous. The key is genuine flexibility rather than fake performance. The most effective energy matching comes from actually entering the state you're mirroring rather than performing it externally while remaining disconnected internally. Power and status are communicated constantly through body language in ways that operate beneath conscious awareness but profoundly influence how others perceive and treat someone. When learning to deliberately use body language that signals confidence and status, power dynamics can be shifted without saying a word. High-status body language involves taking up space rather than making yourself small, moving with deliberate calm rather than nervous quickness, maintaining steady eye contact rather than looking away first, keeping chin level rather than lowered, using gestures that are controlled and purposeful rather than fidgety, speaking with downward inflection that signals statements rather than upward inflection that signals questions, and generally carrying yourself as if you have every right to be wherever you are and expect to be taken seriously. The psychology involves deeply ingrained pattern recognition, where humans unconsciously assess status and threat levels through physical presentation, evolved mechanisms that helped ancestors quickly evaluate social hierarchies and physical capabilities. When presenting high-status body language, people unconsciously treat you as higher status regardless of actual position, giving more attention, respect, and deference than formal role might warrant, while low-status body language causes people to dismiss or overlook you even when you have legitimate authority or expertise. Research in social psychology and organizational behavior demonstrates this repeatedly. In studies where actors used either high or low-status body language while making identical presentations, audiences consistently rated the high-status presenters as more competent, trustworthy, and persuasive. In negotiations, the person who maintains more relaxed, open posture with steady eye contact typically achieves better outcomes than the person with closed, fidgety posture, regardless of the actual strength of their position. Politicians and business leaders invest significant resources in body language coaching because they understand how much physical presentation shapes perception. The practical application involves conscious management of physical signals that most people send unconsciously. Recording yourself speaking and watching with sound off reveals body language patterns you weren't aware of. Direct persuasion often triggers resistance because people's defenses are raised against obvious attempts to change their minds. But when you can package your message inside something they already accept or desire, you bypass their resistance like a Trojan horse sneaking past defensive walls. The technique involves embedding your actual message within a container that seems to be about something else, something the person is already open to, so they accept the container and only later realize they've also accepted what was hidden inside it. This might mean framing a controversial proposal as a solution to a problem they already acknowledge, presenting a new idea as a natural extension of beliefs they already hold, or telling a story that seems to be about one thing but actually contains a very different message that gets absorbed without triggering critical evaluation. Marketing does this constantly. Advertisements that seem to be about lifestyle or aspiration rather than products embed purchasing messages within aspirational narratives. Political messaging frames policy positions within larger narratives about values or identity that audiences already accept. In interpersonal persuasion, when someone has strong resistance to a particular conclusion, approaching it directly triggers their defenses. But wrapping the same conclusion within a story, analogy, or framework they're already aligned with allows the message to slip through. The psychology involves the way people maintain their sense of autonomy and consistency by resisting direct persuasion while remaining open to information that seems to come from their own reasoning or that aligns with their existing commitments. Messages that sneak past the persuasion defense system by not triggering it in the first place are far more effective than frontal assaults. In teaching, this appears as analogies and examples that help students reach conclusions without feeling lectured. In therapy, this appears as stories and questions that guide clients toward insights without direct advice giving that might trigger resistance. Gatekeepers, the assistants and low-level employees who control access to decision-makers and resources, often respond to status displays with resistance because they've learned to protect their bosses from people who try to use importance or urgency to bypass normal procedures. But they respond remarkably well to respectful humility that treats them as human beings with legitimate authority rather than obstacles to be overcome. When approaching gatekeepers with genuine respect, acknowledging their role and expertise, asking for their help rather than demanding access, and generally treating them as allies who can guide you through the system rather than enemies blocking your path, you often gain not just access but active assistance in navigating whatever system they guard. The technique works because gatekeepers have discretion in how helpful or obstructive they choose to be, and they use that discretion based largely on how they're treated. Those who show respect often get unexpected help, while those who display arrogance or impatience get strict rule enforcement. The psychology involves the way people in subordinate positions often feel overlooked or disrespected, and therefore respond powerfully to the rare person who treats them with genuine consideration, combined with the fact that gatekeepers often have more influence than their titles suggest, and can be powerful allies if they choose to advocate for you rather than simply processing your request. Sales professionals who have learned this principle spend time building relationships with assistants and receptionists, recognizing that these individuals often influence whether and how quickly their messages reach decision makers. In large organizations, executive assistants wield enormous informal power. They control calendars, they brief their bosses on who's important to meet with, they can expedite or delay processes. Treating them as important decision makers rather than as obstacles transforms the relationship. Job seekers who are respectful and friendly to receptionists during interviews sometimes get inside information or advocacy they wouldn't receive otherwise. The strategic insight is recognizing that formal organizational charts don't reveal where actual power lies, and that people controlling access points often have more influence than their positions suggest. Every person has an emotional baseline, a typical pattern of emotional expression and reactivity that they display when calm and unstressed. When learning to read this baseline carefully, The ability to detect meaningful deviations is gained that signal important information about their internal state and predict how they're likely to react in various situations. The technique involves paying close attention to how someone normally behaves, their typical energy level, speaking pace, emotional expressiveness, level of animation, and general demeanor when they're comfortable and relaxed, creating a reference point against which changes can be measured. When someone who is normally animated becomes quiet, or someone usually reserved becomes effusive, or any significant deviation from their baseline appears, you know something has shifted emotionally even if they're trying to hide it. This allows investigation or adjustment of approach accordingly. Poker players use this principle when reading opponents. They establish baselines for how each opponent behaves normally, then watch for deviations. A normally chatty player going silent might indicate a strong hand. A normally reserved player becoming animated might indicate a bluff. In personal relationships, noticing when a partner deviates from their baseline emotional expression provides early warning of problems. If someone usually expressive becomes withdrawn, something is bothering them even if they claim everything is fine. In business negotiations, tracking baseline behaviors of counterparties reveals when they're stressed, excited, or hiding information. The psychology involves the fact that emotional baseline is relatively stable, while current emotional state fluctuates based on circumstances, and the gap between baseline and current state reveals information about what's happening internally that people often try to conceal through their words. Law enforcement interrogators are trained to establish baselines before asking critical questions. They ask neutral questions first while observing normal behavior patterns, then watch for deviations when critical topics are introduced. Changes in speech patterns, body language, or emotional expression from baseline indicate areas worth exploring further. The key is taking time to establish accurate baselines rather than making judgments based on single observations. In negotiations, the first offer made has disproportionate influence on the final outcome because it establishes an anchor that shapes all subsequent discussion. When understanding this first offer effect, negotiations can often be controlled by making the first move and setting that anchor in territory favorable to your interests. The person who makes the first offer essentially establishes the reference point from which adjustments are made, and research consistently shows that final agreements correlate strongly with initial offers, even when those offers are extreme or arbitrary, because both parties end up arguing from that starting point rather than evaluating options independently. When making the first offer, it should be ambitious but not so extreme that it's dismissed as ridiculous, finding the sweet spot where it's challenging enough to pull the final outcome significantly in your direction, but credible enough that the other party negotiates from it rather than rejecting it outright. The psychology involves anchoring bias combined with the human tendency to make insufficient adjustments from initial reference points. Even when people recognize the first offer is strategic and plan to move from it, they don't move far enough to escape its gravitational pull. Research by negotiation scholars demonstrates this repeatedly. In salary negotiations, whoever states the first number, whether it's the candidate stating desired salary or the employer stating the offer, typically gets an outcome closer to their initial number. Real estate negotiations show the same pattern. The listing price heavily influences final sale price even when everyone knows the listing price was strategically set. Car dealerships train salespeople to anchor high with initial pricing, knowing that even after negotiations and concessions, the final price will be influenced by that initial anchor. The defensive application involves being prepared with your own first offer rather than waiting to respond to theirs. If you know you might be anchored unfavorably, preempting by anchoring first shifts the entire negotiation range. Additionally, understanding this effect helps recognize when you're being anchored and consciously compensate by adjusting further from their initial offer than feels comfortable. Gaslighting is the manipulative tactic where someone deliberately distorts your perception of reality by denying things they said or did, insisting you remember events incorrectly, and generally making you doubt your own memory and judgment. The most effective defense against this insidious form of manipulation is maintaining written records that provide objective evidence of what actually happened. When suspecting someone of gaslighting, start documenting conversations, agreements, and events in writing, whether through emails that confirm verbal discussions, notes taken during or immediately after important conversations, or journals that track patterns over time. This creates an external memory that can't be manipulated or made to doubt itself. The technique works because gaslighting depends on your uncertainty about your own perceptions and memories, exploiting the fact that human memory is malleable and suggestible. Written records created at the time of events provide anchor points that resist reinterpretation. When someone insists they never said something, and you can produce an email or note from that day confirming they did, you break the gaslighting dynamic because they can no longer make you question your reality. In workplace settings, employees dealing with gaslighting managers often start documenting everything. They send confirmation emails after verbal discussions. Just to confirm our conversation today, you asked me to prioritize Project A over Project B and said the deadline could be extended. This creates records that prevent later denials or reality distortion. In personal relationships where gaslighting is occurring, keeping a journal of events and conversations provides sanity checks when the gaslighter tries to rewrite history. The psychology involves understanding that gaslighting is fundamentally about power through reality control, with the gaslighter attempting to position themselves as the authoritative interpreter of shared experiences. Written records reclaim that authority by providing evidence that stands independent of anyone's interpretation. The emotional difficulty is that maintaining defensive documentation of your relationships feels paranoid and suggests a level of distrust that makes genuine intimacy difficult. Yet sometimes it's absolutely necessary for psychological survival. Vulnerability is often seen as weakness, but when deployed strategically, it becomes one of the most powerful tools for building trust and influence, because controlled disclosure of authentic struggles or uncertainties signals confidence and creates reciprocal openness that superficial perfection never achieves. When sharing something genuinely vulnerable about yourself, something real that reveals your humanity without undermining your competence or status, you create a bonding experience that makes others feel safe to open up in return. You demonstrate the kind of secure self-esteem that can acknowledge imperfection without being diminished by it. The key is strategic selection of what to reveal, choosing vulnerabilities that humanize you without creating doubt about your abilities, sharing struggles you've overcome rather than current crises that might make others question your judgment, and calibrating the depth of disclosure to the relationship and context. The psychology involves the way humans are wired to trust those who show authentic emotion and acknowledge their humanity, combined with the reciprocity norm where vulnerability shared tends to be matched with vulnerability returned, creating intimacy and connection that carefully maintained facades prevent. Leadership research shows that leaders who share appropriate vulnerabilities, acknowledging mistakes, admitting uncertainty about complex decisions, sharing personal challenges they've faced build stronger followership than leaders who maintain perfect facades. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability demonstrates that people connect to humanity, not to perfection, and that the courage to be vulnerable is actually a form of strength. In job interviews, strategic vulnerability might involve honestly acknowledging an area for growth while demonstrating how you're actively working on it. In sales, it might involve acknowledging your product's limitations while emphasizing its strengths and fit for the customer's needs. The line between strategic vulnerability and oversharing is crucial. Strategic vulnerability serves connection and trust building. Oversharing creates discomfort or undermines confidence. Time perception is remarkably flexible and can be influenced through conversational techniques that make interactions feel shorter or longer than they objectively are. When learning to manipulate time perception, tedious necessary conversations can be made to feel brief, or limited time with someone can be made to feel substantial and meaningful. The techniques involve understanding that perceived time duration correlates with attention and engagement rather than clock time. So conversations filled with genuine interest, emotional resonance, and forward momentum feel shorter than boring ones of equal length, while conversations with presence and depth can feel more substantial than longer interactions conducted on autopilot. To make time feel shorter, maintain energy and momentum, ensure the conversation keeps moving toward clear goals, and create enough engagement that the other person enters a flow state where they stop tracking time consciously. To make limited time feel more meaningful, bring full presence and attention, create emotional resonance through vulnerability or humor, and ensure memorable moments that will be mentally rehearsed later, making the interaction feel more substantial in memory than its duration would suggest. The psychology involves the way the brain encodes duration through the number of novel experiences and the intensity of attention. Engaged attention and emotional salience make moments feel rich and full, while distracted autopilot makes time disappear in memory without feeling like it was really experienced. Therapists are skilled at this. A 50-minute therapy session can feel like it just started when it's meaningful and engaging. Dates that feel like they lasted hours might have only been 90 minutes because presence and connection compress time perception. Conversely, boring meetings feel endless even when they're short because lack of engagement makes time drag. The practical application involves conscious attention management. When wanting time to feel shorter, create engagement and flow. When wanting time to feel more substantial, create presence and memorable peaks. Overconfident people often reveal the limits of their knowledge when asked simple, fundamental questions that require deep understanding rather than surface familiarity, because their confidence is frequently based on superficial knowledge that sounds impressive but collapses under gentle probing. When encountering someone making confident assertions or complex arguments, asking them to explain basic assumptions or fundamental mechanisms often exposes whether they truly understand what they're talking about or are simply repeating things they've heard without real comprehension. Questions like, "Can you explain what you mean by that in simpler terms?" or "What would happen if we changed that variable?" or "Why does that mechanism work the way it does?" force people to demonstrate whether their knowledge has depth or is merely memorized talking points. The psychology involves the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with limited knowledge often feel more confident than experts because they don't understand enough to recognize the complexity and uncertainty inherent in the domain. Combined with the fact that superficial knowledge is often easier to present confidently than deep knowledge that includes awareness of nuances and limitations. In academic settings, professors test student understanding not through requests to recite information, but through questions that require application and explanation. A student who has memorized formulas might stumble when asked to explain why the formula works or to apply it to an unusual case. In business, consultants and experts who truly understand their domains can explain concepts in multiple ways and at multiple levels of complexity. Those with superficial knowledge can only present in one mode, usually using jargon and complexity to mask limited understanding. The technique appears in Socratic dialogue, where simple questions reveal whether someone truly understands their own positions. Asking why repeatedly like a child often exposes that confident assertions rest on shaky foundations. The defense against this being used on you involves genuine deep understanding rather than surface knowledge, being comfortable saying, "I don't know," when you don't, and developing the intellectual humility that actually signals expertise. Every group has an underlying structure of relationships, alliances, rivalries, and influence patterns that shapes what happens far more than the explicit content of discussions. When learning to read these dynamics, groups can be navigated effectively by understanding the real forces at play beneath surface interactions. Reading group dynamics involves paying attention to who looks at whom when controversial topics arise, whose opinions seem to carry weight even when they're not formally in charge, which people consistently align with each other and which avoid interaction, who gets interrupted and who can interrupt without pushback, and generally mapping the invisible network of relationships and power that determines outcomes. Subgroups and cliques are identified, opinion leaders whose views others defer to are recognized, rivalries that shape positions are understood, and the flow of influence is tracked that may have little to do with formal hierarchy. The psychology involves understanding that humans are fundamentally social creatures whose behavior in groups is shaped by relationship considerations often more than by the explicit task or topic, and that groups develop emergent properties and structures that no individual fully controls but that powerfully constrain what's possible. In organizational settings, what happens in meetings is often determined before the meeting by the relationship landscape. Formal votes may be predetermined by informal conversations and alliances. Decisions that appear to be made through rational discussion are actually shaped by who is aligned with whom and who holds informal influence over whom. In social groups, understanding the dynamics reveals who actually makes decisions versus who appears to, who holds grudges against whom, which relationships are strong versus performative. Political environments are all about reading these invisible maps, knowing who has the president's ear, who can be influenced through which channels, which coalitions exist, and how stable they are. The practical application involves spending time observing rather than just participating, noting patterns of interaction, tracking who defers to whom, and building mental maps of influence and relationship that allow navigation of group politics effectively. Trust is often built through reciprocal vulnerability, and one of the most effective ways to accelerate trust is by sharing something personal or confidential that demonstrates you trust the other person, triggering reciprocity norms that make them feel obligated to trust you in return. The key is strategic selection of what to share, choosing something that feels genuinely personal or secret, but that doesn't actually create real vulnerability or risk if it becomes public. This essentially means performing trust in ways that create the psychological effect of intimacy without the actual danger of true vulnerability. This might involve sharing a controlled personal story that reveals something about your past, disclosing a business concern that's real but not competitively sensitive, or revealing a personal weakness that's humanizing but not professionally damaging. The psychology involves the way humans interpret disclosure as a signal of trust and feel pressure from reciprocity norms to match that disclosure, creating a spiral of increasing openness where each person tries to match or exceed what the other has shared. People tend to trust those who demonstrate they trust them first. In business development and sales, sophisticated professionals use controlled disclosure to build relationships. They might share something about challenges their own company is facing, creating the impression of candor and partnership rather than transactional selling. In networking, sharing controlled vulnerabilities or challenges makes you memorable and creates connection. The person who presents as perfect is less trusted than the person who acknowledges authentic struggles while maintaining overall competence. The ethical line involves the distinction between strategic disclosure and deceptive manipulation. Strategic disclosure involves sharing real information while being thoughtful about what to share. Deceptive manipulation involves sharing fake vulnerabilities or secrets designed purely to manufacture false intimacy for exploitation. The technique works best when the shared information is genuine, but the selection of what to share and when to share it is strategic. Authority and expertise are often communicated more effectively through subtle displays of knowledge than through obvious credentials or self-promotion. Because when casually referencing deep familiarity with a domain without making a point of it, others infer expertise in ways that direct claims would never achieve. The technique involves letting knowledge show through the quality of questions asked, the precision of terminology used, the sophisticated analysis offered, and the ability to identify issues or opportunities that others miss, all while maintaining a tone that treats this level of insight as unremarkable rather than special. When asking a question that reveals understanding of technical nuances most people miss, when casually referencing frameworks or research that demonstrate deep familiarity, when identifying the real issue beneath the presenting problem, people infer significant expertise even though you never claimed it directly. The psychology involves the way humans use indirect signals to assess competence, often trusting demonstrated knowledge more than stated credentials because it's harder to fake, and because people who are truly expert often take their knowledge for granted rather than advertising it constantly. In business meetings, the consultant who asks penetrating questions that reveal they've already thought through the complexities of the situation establishes more credibility than the consultant who opens by listing their qualifications. In technical discussions, the person who can explain complex concepts in simple terms while also diving into detailed nuance when appropriate demonstrates mastery that recitation of credentials never achieves. Academic contexts show this pattern. The most respected scholars often speak with humility about what they know while demonstrating depth through their questions and observations, whereas insecure academics lecture and name drop. The practical application involves developing genuine deep expertise rather than surface knowledge, then letting that expertise reveal itself through contribution rather than proclamation. Recording yourself in professional conversations and noting whether you demonstrate knowledge through questions and insights or through claims and credentials reveals your pattern. When someone attacks or criticizes, the person who gets to tell the story of what happened to the broader audience often wins regardless of who was actually right. When learning to own the narrative, even legitimate attacks can be transformed into opportunities to strengthen position. Owning the narrative means being first and most compelling in framing what happened and what it means, acknowledging whatever truth exists in the criticism while contextualizing it in ways that support your position, and generally ensuring that your version of events becomes the dominant interpretation that others reference and repeat. This might involve immediately addressing criticism head-on before it spreads, preemptively acknowledging weaknesses before others can weaponize them, or reframing attacks as evidence of your importance or effectiveness rather than your failure. Political figures do this constantly. When attacked, sophisticated politicians don't just deny the accusations, they reframe the attack itself as evidence of something favorable, like the establishment is threatened by our message, or this shows how desperate our opponents have become. In business, when a competitor attacks your product, owning the narrative might involve acknowledging the critique while reframing it. Yes, our solution costs more, and here's why customers who care about quality choose to invest. The psychology involves the way humans understand events through stories rather than raw facts, with the first coherent narrative often becoming the reference point against which other interpretations are judged. Most people are too busy or disinterested to investigate deeply and therefore accept whatever narrative is most readily available and compellingly told. In crisis management, companies that get ahead of negative stories by telling their own version first, even if that version includes admitting fault, often fare better than those that remain silent and let others control the narrative. The key is speed and coherence, crafting a story that makes sense, addresses the legitimate concerns, and positions you favorably, then disseminating that story quickly and consistently before alternative narratives take hold. The foot-in-the-door technique is a persuasion method where first getting someone to agree to a small, easy request, then later presenting a larger related request that they're now more likely to accept because they've already committed to the general category of action and want to maintain consistency with their previous choice. When using this technique, start with something so small that refusal seems petty or unreasonable, perhaps asking someone to answer a quick question, sign a petition, or accept a small favor. Once they've said yes to that initial request, follow up with your real ask, which is significantly larger but related enough that refusing it would feel inconsistent with their previous agreement. The technique works because humans have a powerful drive for consistency, and once we've taken a position or action, we feel psychological pressure to behave consistently with it in the future, even when the subsequent request is much more demanding than the initial one. Research by social psychologists, particularly the work documented in Cialdini's Influence, shows this effect repeatedly. In one classic study, homeowners who agreed to place a small sign in their window supporting safe driving were later much more likely to agree to place a large, ugly billboard in their front yard for the same cause, compared to homeowners who hadn't made the initial small commitment. The psychology involves commitment and consistency biases, the way initial compliance creates a self-perception as someone who does this type of thing, and the sunk cost fallacy, where having already invested even minimal effort makes further investment feel more justified. Charities use this systematically, first asking for email sign-ups or petition signatures, which cost nothing, before later requesting donations. The initial commitment, though small, creates identity shift, where people begin seeing themselves as supporters of the cause. In workplace contexts, managers might ask for small favors or minor deadline accommodations before requesting larger commitments, using the pattern of agreement to make bigger asks feel like natural progressions. The ethical boundary lies in whether the technique serves mutual benefit or one-sided exploitation. The human ego is remarkably vulnerable to flattery, even when the person being flattered consciously recognizes the flattery as strategic. When learning to use genuine, specific praise toward people who oppose you, hostility can often be transformed into alliance by giving them something their ego craves more than it values the conflict. The technique involves identifying something genuinely praiseworthy about your adversary and complimenting it sincerely and specifically, not with obvious manipulation, but with recognition that acknowledges their strengths or contributions in ways that create cognitive dissonance between their positive feelings from the praise and their negative feelings toward you. When complimenting someone who expects you to compete with them or defend against them, you disarm their aggression by giving them what they were perhaps fighting for all along, which is recognition and respect. You create reciprocity pressure where maintaining hostility toward someone who praises you feels petty and small. Historical examples exist of this principle in action. Benjamin Franklin famously turned an adversary into an ally by asking to borrow a rare book from the man's library. The request flattered the man's book collection and knowledge, and after lending the book, he felt cognitive dissonance about being hostile to someone he'd helped, leading to friendship. In business contexts, when competitors or difficult colleagues receive genuine acknowledgement of their expertise or accomplishments, the dynamic often shifts from adversarial to collaborative. The psychology involves the way humans hunger for recognition and positive regard, often more than they care about whatever surface issue is being fought over, combined with the reciprocity norm that makes it psychologically difficult to attack someone who has just genuinely praised you. The key word is genuine. The flattery must be real and specific, identifying actual strengths or accomplishments rather than offering empty compliments. Insincere flattery backfires by increasing suspicion and hostility, but finding something truly admirable about an opponent and acknowledging it creates opening for relationship transformation. Crowds and consensus often lead to poor decisions because of groupthink, information cascades where people copy others' choices rather than thinking independently, and the way markets and social trends overshoot in both directions as more people pile into what's already popular. When learning to think contrarian, questioning consensus, and looking for opportunities or truths that others miss because they're following the herd, access to value and insight invisible to those moving with the crowd is gained. Contrarian thinking doesn't mean reflexively opposing whatever's popular, but rather means independently evaluating situations without being swayed by what everyone else thinks, being willing to hold minority positions when your analysis supports them, and recognizing that the crowd is often most wrong at the extremes of consensus when everyone believes the same thing and acts accordingly. Warren Buffett's famous advice to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful captures this principle in investing. The best opportunities often appear when everyone else is pessimistic and avoiding a sector or asset class. The worst time to buy is usually when everyone else is enthusiastically buying and prices have been driven to extremes by crowd behavior. The psychology involves understanding that humans are social creatures with powerful conformity drives that often override rational analysis, and that markets and social domains tend toward overreaction as information cascades and bandwagon effects amplify trends beyond what fundamentals support. In business, contrarian thinking might mean launching products that go against current trends because you see the trend reversing, or investing in capabilities that competitors are abandoning because you anticipate future needs. In career decisions, it might mean pursuing paths that are currently unfashionable but that you believe will become valuable. The challenge is that contrarian thinking is lonely and often requires enduring periods where you seem wrong while the crowd seems right. You miss out on the social comfort of consensus and the validation of agreement. But understanding that the crowd is often wrong precisely when it's most confident, that the most valuable insights come from seeing what others miss rather than seeing what everyone sees, makes the isolation worthwhile when proven correct. The halo effect is the cognitive bias where positive impressions in one domain create positive assumptions in unrelated domains, so that someone who is attractive, articulate, or successful in one visible way is automatically assumed to be competent, moral, and capable in other ways, even without evidence. When understanding the halo effect, excellence or visibility can be strategically cultivated in domains that create positive halos that benefit you in other areas, investing in skills or credentials that signal general competence even when they're not directly relevant to your goals. This might mean developing public speaking skills that make people assume you're knowledgeable about many topics, maintaining excellent personal appearance that creates assumptions about your professionalism and competence, or building a reputation in one area that creates credibility when you move into adjacent fields. The psychology involves the way the brain uses heuristics and shortcuts to assess complex situations, essentially using salient positive attributes as a proxy for overall quality when it would be too cognitively expensive to evaluate everything independently. Attractive people are assumed to be more intelligent, capable, and trustworthy, even though physical appearance has no logical connection to these qualities. People with prestigious educational credentials are assumed to be competent in areas unrelated to their degrees. Successful entrepreneurs are assumed to have wisdom about politics or social issues, even when their expertise is narrow. The practical application involves identifying which visible attributes or achievements would create the most valuable halo effects for your goals, then strategically investing in developing those attributes. For someone building a consulting practice, writing a book or speaking at conferences creates halos that make people assume expertise across broader domains than the book or talks actually covered. For someone in technical fields, developing one highly visible successful project creates assumptions of competence that extend to other projects. The ethical consideration involves the gap between the halo and actual competence. Using halos to get opportunities where you can then demonstrate actual competence is different from using halos to gain positions where you lack the competence to perform. Gossip thrives in information vacuums where people fill gaps with speculation and assumptions, often creating narratives more damaging than reality. When learning to practice controlled transparency, sharing some information strategically while protecting truly sensitive matters, gossip can often be neutralized by removing the mystery that fuels it. The technique involves being relatively open about things that seem personal but aren't actually damaging, while being extremely private about matters that actually could hurt you if widely known. This essentially means satisfying people's curiosity with controlled revelations that prevent them from digging for more damaging material. When sharing some aspects of your personal life or challenges you're facing, people feel they have the inside story and are less motivated to speculate or investigate further. But you carefully select what to share to ensure you're controlling the narrative rather than exposing real vulnerabilities. The psychology involves the way humans are naturally curious about others and will create stories to explain what they don't understand. But when you provide some information, it satisfies that curiosity, and people typically accept what you tell them rather than continuing to dig, especially if what you share seems candid and personal enough to feel like the real story. In workplace environments where office politics and gossip are prevalent, strategic transparency can be protective. Rather than being completely private and mysterious, which invites speculation, sharing controlled information about your life and work creates the impression of openness while maintaining privacy about what actually matters. Public figures manage this constantly. They share enough personal information to satisfy public curiosity and create sense of access while protecting their actual private lives. Social media has made this technique both more important and more challenging. The pressure to share constantly can lead to oversharing, but completely avoiding social media presence can make you mysterious and subject to speculation. The balance involves curating what you share to create impressions you want while protecting what you need to protect. The key is never confusing controlled transparency with actual openness. You're strategically managing information flow, not being genuinely transparent. Human memory is not a faithful recording of experiences, but rather a highlights reel constructed primarily from emotional peaks and endings, which means that people will remember you based on the most intense moments you create rather than the average quality of your interactions. When understanding this peak-end rule, memorable moments can be strategically created by engineering emotional high points in your interactions, whether through unexpected generosity, genuine laughter, moments of profound insight, or experiences that break the monotony of ordinary interaction. A single powerful moment where you made someone feel truly seen, or helped them in an unexpected way, or created an experience they didn't anticipate will be remembered far more vividly than a dozen pleasant but unremarkable interactions. Their overall impression of you will be disproportionately influenced by that peak experience. The psychology involves the way the brain encodes memories based on emotional salience and novelty, rather than duration or average quality, essentially optimizing for remembering the most significant moments rather than creating accurate records of everything that happened. Research by Daniel Kahneman on remembered versus experienced utility demonstrates that people's memories of experiences are dominated by peaks and endings rather than by the sum total or average of the experience. In one famous study, people preferred experiences that ended on a high note even when those experiences involved more total discomfort than alternatives that ended poorly. The practical application involves identifying opportunities to create memorable peaks rather than distributing effort evenly across all interactions. In customer service, creating one exceptional moment of going above and beyond creates more loyalty than consistently adequate service. In relationships, planning surprising special experiences creates more lasting positive memories than routine pleasant time together. In professional settings, delivering one exceptional insight or contribution in a meeting makes you more memorable than steady competent participation. The key is authenticity. Manufactured moments feel manipulative if they're detected. The most powerful peaks come from genuine moments of connection, generosity, or excellence that stand out against the background of normal interaction. Manipulators rely on understanding patterns, predicting responses, and exploiting consistent behaviors to control situations and people. Which means that one of the most effective defenses against manipulation is cultivating unpredictability that prevents them from developing reliable models of how you'll react. When varying responses to similar situations, sometimes accommodating and sometimes refusing, sometimes engaging and sometimes withdrawing, sometimes explaining yourself and sometimes offering no explanation, you deny manipulators the pattern recognition they need to effectively manipulate you. The technique involves being inconsistent in ways that serve your interests rather than theirs, refusing to be reliably anything, and generally making it impossible for someone to predict what approach will work with you because what worked last time might not work this time. The psychology involves the way manipulation depends on conditional strategies where the manipulator tries different approaches and repeats whatever works. When nothing works reliably because your responses are unpredictable, they lose the ability to refine their tactics and often give up to find easier targets. In abusive relationships, abusers often rely on predictable reactions from their victims. Certain behaviors trigger certain responses that the abuser then exploits. When victims start responding unpredictably, sometimes engaging with accusations and sometimes ignoring them, sometimes being available and sometimes being unavailable without pattern, it disrupts the control dynamic. In business negotiations, being unpredictable about your priorities, timeline, and deal breakers makes it harder for counterparties to exploit your patterns. In workplace politics, varying your responses to pressure and manipulation prevents colleagues from developing reliable strategies for manipulating you. The downside is that unpredictability can feel uncomfortable and inconsistent with ideals of authenticity and reliability. There's real tension between being trustworthy and consistent in healthy relationships while being unpredictable as defense against manipulation in toxic ones. The key is context-dependent. Strategic unpredictability is reserved for situations where manipulation is occurring, while maintaining consistency and reliability in genuine relationships. Human behavior operates largely on autopilot through established patterns and scripts. When interrupting these patterns with unexpected responses or actions, a moment of confusion is created where people are suddenly forced to think consciously rather than running their usual programs, giving you an opportunity to redirect the interaction. Pattern interrupts work by violating expectations in ways that break someone out of their automatic response mode, whether that's responding to aggression with humor instead of defensiveness, answering a closed question with a question instead of a yes or no, or doing something physically unexpected like suddenly standing when you were sitting or moving closer when retreat is expected. The moment of confusion and recalibration that follows a pattern interrupt creates an opening where the usual flow of interaction is disrupted and new directions become possible, where scripts that were controlling the situation suddenly don't apply and both parties have to improvise. Hypnotherapists and NLP practitioners use pattern interrupts extensively. Milton Erickson, the famous psychiatrist, would interrupt handshakes halfway through or suddenly change topics mid-sentence to create confusion that made patients more susceptible to suggestion and therapeutic intervention. In sales, when a customer gives a standard objection that they've used many times before and expects a standard response, giving an unexpected response disrupts their script and creates opening for new conversation. In arguments, when someone is prepared for you to defend yourself against their accusations, and you instead ask them a question or acknowledge their point while reframing the issue, you interrupt the argument pattern they were following. The psychology involves the way humans navigate most interactions through learned scripts and automatic responses that require minimal cognitive effort. When these scripts are interrupted, we experience a moment of uncertainty where we're more suggestible and less defended because our automatic responses have been disabled. The practical application requires creativity and awareness of what patterns are operating. When recognizing you're trapped in a pattern that doesn't serve you, repetitive argument cycles, manipulative relationship dynamics, unproductive meeting patterns, deliberately doing something unexpected creates opportunity for the interaction to flow differently. One of the most effective ways to neutralize criticism is to acknowledge its substance before critics can weaponize it, essentially stealing their ammunition by incorporating their likely critiques into your own presentation, which demonstrates self-awareness and removes the power critics gain from revealing flaws you were trying to hide. When preemptively acknowledging weaknesses in your position, limitations in your knowledge, or valid concerns about your proposal, multiple things are accomplished simultaneously. Honesty and self-awareness that builds credibility is demonstrated. The limitations are framed on your own terms rather than letting critics frame them negatively. Critics are robbed of the satisfaction and impact of exposing flaws, and acknowledging problems head-on often makes them seem less significant than they would if you tried to hide them. The psychology involves the way humans perceive honesty and confidence, with preemptive acknowledgement signaling secure self-esteem and genuine understanding, while defensive concealment of flaws signals insecurity and potential dishonesty. When showing you already know and have considered the weaknesses critics might raise, you demonstrate that these concerns haven't escaped your notice and haven't prevented you from proceeding, implying they're less serious than critics would like to claim. In academic presentations, sophisticated speakers acknowledge limitations of their research up front rather than waiting for critics to point them out during Q&A. This demonstrates intellectual honesty and often prevents criticism because critics can't simply point out flaws you've already acknowledged. They have to engage with why you proceeded despite those limitations. In business pitches, acknowledging risks or challenges in your plan while explaining how you'll address them is more credible than presenting everything as perfect. Investors appreciate realistic assessment of challenges over naive optimism. In personal relationships, acknowledging your own contribution to conflicts before the other person has to point it out often diffuses tension and creates space for productive conversation. The key is genuine acknowledgement rather than defensive preemptive strikes. The tone should be matter-of-fact recognition of real limitations, not sarcastic dismissal of potential criticisms. Most debates can be won not by having better answers to the question being asked, but by reframing what question is actually being asked, essentially shifting the terrain of the debate to ground more favorable to your position. When successfully redefining the question, what counts as relevant evidence is changed, what standards of proof apply are altered, and what outcomes constitute success are transformed, often making your position obviously correct within the new frame, even if it was struggling within the old one. This might involve shifting from "can we afford this" to "can we afford not to do this," from "is this perfect" to "is this better than the alternative," or from narrow technical questions to broader questions about values and priorities that favor your perspective. The technique works because debates happen within frames that determine what's relevant and what success looks like. Whoever controls the frame usually wins regardless of the object-level arguments. In political debates, skilled debaters don't accept the framing of questions they're asked. When asked about specific policy failures, they reframe to broader questions about philosophy or values. When asked about values, they reframe to specific practical outcomes. The psychology involves the way human reasoning works through frames and schemas that organize information and determine what counts as a good argument. Frame setting often happens implicitly at the start of a debate and rarely being questioned once established, meaning that the person who successfully redefines the question often wins before substantive arguments even begin. In legal contexts, lawyers spend enormous energy on framing. Is this case about individual rights or public safety? About intent or impact? The frame determines which precedents seem relevant, which evidence matters, which arguments resonate. In business meetings, someone proposing a new initiative might face the question, will this generate immediate ROI? Reframing to, will this position us strategically for the future? Changes what success looks like and what evidence is relevant. The defense involves recognizing when frames are being imposed and explicitly discussing what the right frame should be rather than accepting the first frame presented. Intimidation tactics work by creating emotional arousal and fear that disrupts clear thinking and makes targets more likely to submit or make mistakes, which means that the most effective response to intimidation is calm precision that demonstrates you're not emotionally affected and that you're thinking more clearly than the intimidator. When someone tries to intimidate through aggressive posturing, raised voice, threats, or displays of power, responding with careful, precise, measured communication that addresses the substance while completely ignoring the intimidation tactics often causes the intimidation to collapse because it's not achieving its psychological goal. Speaking more quietly and slowly rather than matching their volume and pace, addressing specific factual issues rather than responding to emotional content, maintaining relaxed body language rather than defensive postures, and generally demonstrating through your demeanor that their attempts at intimidation are not just failing, but are beneath your notice often causes intimidators to either escalate to absurdity or back down in embarrassment. The psychology involves the way intimidation depends on triggering fear responses that compromise judgment and self-control. When the target remains calm and focused, the intimidator is left looking foolish for bringing emotional intensity to an interaction where the other person is being rational and precise. In legal depositions, attorneys sometimes try to intimidate witnesses with aggressive questioning and hostile tones. Witnesses trained in responding with calm, precise answers to the actual questions rather than reacting to the emotional tone often frustrate these tactics. In business negotiations, when counterparties attempt to intimidate with ultimatums or aggressive posturing, responding with calm questions about specifics and logical analysis of options often reveals the intimidation was bluffing. In workplace conflicts, managers or colleagues who attempt to intimidate subordinates or peers with anger or threats often retreat when met with calm, factual responses that don't engage with the emotional intimidation. The key is genuine calm rather than suppressed rage masquerading as calm. People detect false composure, and it can escalate situations. Authentic calm comes from genuinely not being threatened by the intimidation, recognizing it as the intimidator's loss of control rather than as actual threat. Reciprocity is one of the most powerful social norms, creating strong psychological pressure to return favors and match what others do for us. But sophisticated operators learn to leverage this norm strategically while avoiding the trap of feeling obligated to reciprocate manipulative or strategic favors. The key is understanding that reciprocity can be managed by being first to give in situations where you want to create obligation, by accepting favors strategically while recognizing when favors are really investments in future manipulation, and by calibrating your reciprocation to match the spirit rather than the letter of what was given. When doing favors for others that cost you little but feel valuable to them, you create reciprocity pressure efficiently. But when others do unsolicited favors for you, especially ones you didn't want or need, you can recognize these as attempts to create artificial obligation and either refuse them or reciprocate minimally rather than feeling bound to match their investment. The psychology involves the way humans are wired to feel uncomfortable with unreciprocated favors, creating psychological debt that feels like it must be repaid. Manipulators exploit this by creating obligations you never agreed to and then demanding repayment far exceeding what they gave. Car salespeople offer coffee or small gifts before beginning sales pitches because they know these tiny favors create psychological pressure to reciprocate by being more agreeable. Cult recruiters offer help and community before making demands because the accumulated sense of debt makes it harder to refuse later requests. In business relationships, being strategic about accepting help and favors prevents accumulation of obligations that might be called in at inconvenient times. Politely declining unsolicited favors with, "I appreciate the offer, but I've got it handled," prevents debt creation. When accepting help, explicitly framing it as mutual benefit rather than one-sided favor prevents obligation creation. The key distinction is between genuine reciprocity in healthy relationships, where exchanges are roughly balanced over time without explicit tracking, versus manipulative deployment of strategic favors designed to create exploitable obligations. Maintaining awareness of whether reciprocity pressure is natural or manufactured protects against manipulation while allowing genuine reciprocal relationships to flourish. Many relationships that appear to be friendships are actually strategic alliances based on mutual convenience, status association, or proximity. These fair-weather connections reveal themselves under pressure or when tested, which means that learning to test loyalty carefully allows distinguishing genuine friends from opportunistic associates. Testing loyalty doesn't mean creating dramatic tests or manipulating situations, but rather paying attention to how people respond to your struggles, whether they show up when you need them without visible benefit to themselves, whether they defend you when you're not present to reward them, whether they're genuinely happy for your successes even when those successes outshine theirs, and whether they maintain the relationship when you're going through periods where you're less fun, less successful, or less able to provide value to them. Real friends remain consistent across your ups and downs, while fake friends appear when you're ascending and disappear when you're struggling, are supportive when others are watching but dismissive when you're alone, and generally reveal through countless small choices that the relationship is conditional on what you provide rather than based on genuine care for you as a person. The psychology involves understanding that humans form relationships for various reasons, including genuine affection, but also status seeking, resource access, and social positioning. Many people are not consciously manipulative, but simply don't distinguish between genuine friendship and strategic alliance, treating all relationships as transactional without recognizing they're doing so. In practice, testing might involve seeing who reaches out during difficult times when you're not actively socializing, noticing who celebrates your successes versus who seems threatened or competitive, observing who maintains contact when you're not able to provide social value or connections. Career transitions often reveal true friendships. When changing industries or cities, some relationships evaporate while others persist despite losing the proximate or professional connection. Financial difficulties reveal loyalty. Some people distance themselves from struggling friends while real friends show up with support. The painful reality is that discovering who truly cares about you often requires experiencing adversity that reveals who stays and who leaves. Human beings rarely evaluate options in isolation. We compare. We look at what's on the table and pick what seems reasonable next to the alternatives. A decoy option takes advantage of this by introducing a choice that isn't meant to be chosen. It exists only to make another option look better. Classic example, a magazine offers a digital subscription for $59, a print subscription for $125, and a print plus digital bundle also for $125. Nobody takes the print-only plan, but its presence makes the bundle feel like a steal. Psychologists call this the asymmetric dominance effect. When one option is clearly worse than another but similar in format, our brain relaxes. We feel we're making a rational decision by rejecting the bad one and taking the good one. This technique works everywhere: sales, salary negotiations, product pricing, even social dynamics. If you want your suggestion to feel smart and balanced, you can place a slightly worse version next to it so the contrast flatters your true target. The real skill lies in subtlety. The decoy must feel legitimate, not obvious manipulation. In a job offer, for instance, you might present 3 compensation packages: one with a low base and no perks, one with high base but bad benefits, and the one you want them to pick, balanced base plus great benefits. People feel empowered by rejecting the clearly bad choice while unknowingly choosing exactly what you wanted. Understanding this changes how you see decisions. You stop assuming that available options are neutral and start asking, who built this menu and why? You learn to protect yourself by generating your own alternatives instead of picking between the ones presented. Stress hijacks clear thinking. In critical conversations, a negotiation, a performance review, a big pitch, your body floods with adrenaline, your heart races, your breathing shortens. This ancient survival system wants you to fight or flee, not think strategically. Outsmarting stress means training your nervous system to stay calm when the stakes feel high. One key tactic is pre-exposure. Rehearse the pressure. Athletes simulate match-day tension. Public speakers practice in front of small but judgmental audiences. When the brain has seen the stress before, it stops treating it like a threat. Another is controlled breathing. Slow exhale breathing, inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 6, activates the parasympathetic nervous system, signaling safety and restoring clear thought. Also, naming what's happening helps. Saying silently, "My body is preparing me to perform," reframes symptoms as readiness instead of danger. In negotiations, the calm person almost always wins because adrenaline clouds judgment and leads to bad concessions. In emergencies, pilots and surgeons are trained to use checklists and verbalize steps, not because they forget, but because stress impairs working memory. Once you understand the mechanics, you stop fearing stress itself and start seeing it as energy you can channel. You become the person who stays clear-headed when others freeze or overreact, a huge power advantage in any high-stakes setting. Questions aren't always innocent. People ask to gather data, test boundaries, or steer you somewhere. Reading the motive behind a question is a social superpower. Start by noting pattern and context. Is this person sharing about themselves or only pulling from you? Are the questions neutral or do they target vulnerabilities, money, plans, fears? Manipulators often use probing curiosity disguised as friendliness. A boss asking, "What do you think about the team's future?" may really be testing loyalty. A colleague asking, "Are you happy with your workload?" might be looking for leverage. Notice emotional undertone. Some questions come with flattery to lower your guard, some with subtle pressure to push you to reveal. You can protect yourself by answering at the level of trust you actually feel. Share safe, surface info until you're sure of their intent. You can also flip the script. Respond with your own gentle question to gauge why they're asking. Interesting, what made you ask that? Psychologically, people reveal their goals through the direction of their curiosity. They rarely waste questions. Once you see this, conversations change. You no longer treat every question as neutral but as a possible move in a larger game. This keeps you from oversharing and lets you navigate relationships strategically, revealing only what you choose, not what someone subtly extracts. Social pressure works quietly but powerfully. Most people do not change their minds because they have been logically convinced. They change because they fear standing out. We are wired for survival in groups, and groups enforce conformity with subtle signals, glances, pauses, smirks, moments of silence that seem to demand agreement. Someone suggests a plan, everyone looks around, and the unspoken message is just go along. The discomfort you feel in those seconds is ancient. Being excluded once meant danger. That is why silence feels unbearable when everyone seems to expect your agreement. But the person who learns to remain calm and unbothered in that vacuum flips the dynamic completely. When you hold your posture steady, keep your breathing slow, and simply do not fill the silence with apologies or justification, you send a signal that you do not need the group's approval. People expect resistance or argument and are prepared for it. When nothing comes, they feel their own uncertainty. This effect is powerful because humans read nonverbal dominance faster than words. The one who seems comfortable when everyone else fidgets is often assumed to have hidden strength. In business meetings, the senior leader who sits back quietly while others talk gains authority without saying a word. In a group of friends, someone who does not rush to join in teasing or peer pressure becomes unpredictable and strangely respected. The skill starts with self-regulation. When you feel your heart race, focus on exhaling longer than you inhale, drop your shoulders, keep a soft but steady gaze, then respond with less than you think you must. If everyone is pressuring you to agree, a calm "I need some time to think about" that can stop momentum better than a long defensive speech. If friends push you to do something reckless, a quiet "I am not doing that" delivered with calm certainty holds more power than angry refusal. The point is to avoid sarcasm or rage because those restart the attack. Over time, silent confidence teaches others you cannot be guilted or rushed, and it teaches you that you can survive disapproval without losing identity. It is not about being cold. You can still be warm and friendly when you want. It is about having an inner stillness that appears when pressure arrives, a stillness that silently says, "I will not bend just to fit in." Conflict has a tempo. Arguments thrive on speed. Accusation, defense, counterattack. The faster it moves, the less anyone thinks. That speed is an enemy of clarity. We say things we regret, concede points we should not, or get trapped in someone else's frame. Slow responses break this rhythm and reclaim control. When someone comes at you, an angry boss, a partner accusing, a colleague poking holes, the body floods with adrenaline. Your amygdala screams defend now, but the smartest move is often to wait. Even a pause of 3 seconds changes the interaction. The attacker expects instant compliance or emotional explosion. Silence makes them question their own aggression. Then you respond deliberately, not from panic but from clarity. Psychologically, slowing down moves the brain from the fight or flight center to the prefrontal cortex, where planning and logic live. Lawyers are trained to pause before answering. Negotiators sip water to buy a few seconds. Elite athletes create microbreaks before reacting to pressure. In personal life, saying "let me think about that for a moment" can save a relationship from spiraling. Simple tactics help. Breathe deeply before you speak. Use neutral placeholders like "I hear you, give me a second to process." Or if things are hot, say, "I do not want to say something I will regret, let us pause and talk in an hour." This is not stonewalling. You must return to the discussion. It is about thoughtful pacing. Slow responses also signal authority. People who are confident do not rush. Think of calm leaders who speak last. They unsettle aggressors simply by not matching urgency. Even over email, waiting before replying to provocation can break manipulation loops. The key is authentic composure, not passive aggression. Once mastered, slow responding makes you hard to provoke, de-escalates drama, and lets you think strategically when everyone else is reactive. Charm feels magical because it hijacks deep social needs, to be seen, valued, safe. Charismatic people know how to trigger warmth and trust quickly. Steady eye contact, mirroring your body language, using your name, laughing at your jokes, light touches, flattering you with subtle compliments. These behaviors are not bad in themselves. In healthy hands, they build real connection. But manipulators use the same moves to bypass your critical thinking. The moment someone showers you with unusual attention very early, speeds up intimacy, or acts as if you have been lifelong friends after one conversation, it is wise to pause. Ask yourself why the rush and what they might want. Healthy connection develops over time. Manipulative charm floods warmth up front to win trust before asking for a sale, a favor, or control. The psychology behind this is reciprocity and liking bias. When someone makes us feel valued, we want to return favor and assume safety. Salespeople personalize pitches and flatter to push us toward yes. Cult recruiters use love bombing to bond recruits before introducing demands. Toxic partners idealize early, then leverage that closeness to control. You do not have to reject kindness, just stay aware. Slow the timeline, do not agree to big commitments or deals on the spot. Sleep on offers, see if the warmth stays when no quick payoff is possible. Observe balance, do they show genuine curiosity about your needs and limits, or is their attention mostly about steering the conversation toward their goal? When charm is healthy, it survives boundaries. When it is manipulative, it withers if you do not rush. Also test with small no's. A sincere person will respect hesitation. A manipulator will push or guilt trip. Knowing this keeps you from being swept into bad deals, draining relationships, or groupthink simply because someone made you feel seen. It replaces blind enchantment with clear-eyed choice, letting you enjoy authentic warmth but stay immune to false intimacy designed for control. People care more about what they have built with their own hands than about anything they receive finished and perfect, and this simple psychological truth can change how you persuade, sell, and lead. Psychologists call it the IKEA effect because the furniture giant discovered that even though customers often struggle to assemble its products, the act of putting in effort makes them feel a stronger bond to the final piece. Humans dislike the feeling that their work was wasted. When we invest time and energy, we unconsciously upgrade the value of whatever we built so our effort feels meaningful. You can use this same principle when you want someone to support an idea, approve a plan, or stay committed to a decision. Instead of arriving with a flawless, polished proposal that asks for nothing but a yes, bring something that invites participation. Ask for opinions early, show that a few important details are undecided, let people shape the end result. Once they have contributed, they become psychological co-owners. They will defend the idea later because rejecting it would mean admitting their own effort was wasted. Managers who let teams co-create new workflows see far less resistance than those who hand down rules fully formed. A salesperson who lets a client customize features or choose between configurations makes the product feel like the client's own creation. Even in personal life, asking someone's advice or help creates a bond. Once they have invested, they tend to want to see you succeed. The key is sincerity. Offer real choices, not fake busywork. People sense when their input is meaningless. If you ask for help or ideas but ignore them, you break trust and the effect reverses. When done right, this turns passive audiences into partners and skeptics into champions. Instead of wasting energy convincing, you guide people to build with you, and once they build, they care. Some people survive on reaction the way plants survive on sunlight. They stir drama, exaggerate struggles, or dominate conversation because every sigh, laugh, argument, or attempt to soothe them is a hit of psychological fuel. The mistake most of us make is feeding this need without realizing it. We think we are helping by engaging, reassuring, or even arguing, but any response, even irritation, keeps the spotlight where they want it. The way to break free is strategic starvation. You stay calm, kind, but neutral. Short answers, no emotional performance, no reward. At first, attention seekers may escalate. Silence and low energy feel like rejection to them. They may push harder, provoke, or guilt trip. But if you remain steady, their tactic stops paying off and they look elsewhere for easier validation. In workplaces, this means not rushing to comfort a coworker who turns every meeting into a personal vent session. You respond briefly, then return to the topic. In social life, it means not rewarding outrageous stories or endless one-upmanship. Smile politely, then move the conversation on. The psychology is reinforcement. Behavior that stops being rewarded eventually dies. The challenge is emotional discipline because attention seekers are skilled at baiting. They may hint that you are cold or uncaring to hook you back. Recognize this as manipulation and stay balanced, polite but unhooked. Over time, they either shift to healthier interaction or seek new audiences, and you reclaim your energy. This is not cruelty, it is boundary setting. You cannot save someone who feeds on attention by giving them more of what keeps them stuck. You can only stop fueling the cycle. Betrayal almost never arrives as a total surprise. It leaves a trail of small, often ignored signs long before the decisive act. People who are planning to leave, cheat, or undermine you wrestle with inner conflict, guilt, and shifting loyalty, and those emotions leak through tiny cracks in behavior. If you want to protect yourself from blindside pain, start watching for pattern changes. A colleague who once shared openly becomes guarded. A friend who was relaxed and warm starts sounding polite but distant. Someone who always celebrated your wins now reacts coolly or not at all. Texts slow down. Responses shrink from paragraphs to short replies. Plans that used to excite them suddenly get vague excuses. Body language subtly withdraws, less eye contact, less mirroring, less spontaneous touch. No single clue proves betrayal, but patterns matter. Humans struggle to fake emotional stability when intentions change. Most people ignore these shifts because they want safety and stability, but ignoring them does not stop the change, it only blinds you. Learning to notice early gives you options. You can address the distance directly and sometimes repair trust. You can also quietly prepare for the fallout, secure resources, reduce vulnerability, or pivot before harm hits. This skill is not paranoia, it is adaptive realism. It does not mean suspect everyone. It means stay awake to real signals instead of clinging to comforting illusions. Mature people combine hope with alertness. They appreciate loyalty but verify it through behavior, not just words. They are rarely shocked because they read the emotional weather as it changes and act with foresight rather than desperation. Every time someone tries to convince you to accept a deal, a price, or an idea, they are using one of the most reliable tricks in human psychology: anchoring. Anchoring works because the first number or frame you hear shapes the way you judge everything that follows. If a salesperson starts by saying this product normally costs $5,000, your brain builds a mental reference point around 5,000. Even if they quickly drop the price to 3,000, 3 now feels cheap compared to the first anchor, even if it was far more than you were willing to pay at the start. Negotiators, advertisers, and manipulators use anchors constantly because they know most people are unaware of how strong the effect is. Outsmarting this does not mean ignoring anchors. The brain can't simply erase the first number it hears. The trick is to build your own counter-anchors fast and firmly. Before you enter any negotiation or high-stakes conversation, create a clear mental anchor of your own: the price you believe is fair, the outcome you want, the frame you intend to operate within. Say it early and with confidence. If someone offers a number first and it is extreme, respond by immediately reframing. For example, if a recruiter says the salary for the role is around 60,000 and you know your target is 80, don't just argue why you're worth more. Calmly say that most offers in your field for this skill set start closer to 90 and work down from there. You are planting a new anchor in their brain to compete with the one they tried to plant in yours. The same is true outside of money. If someone tries to sell you an idea by starting with fear, this is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. If you miss it, you will regret it forever. Counter-anchor by reframing the stakes. Real opportunities appear many times. The real risk is rushing into something poorly considered. When you respond with a calm, credible new frame, you don't erase their anchor, but you dilute it and give your brain a new reference to hold. One of the most powerful counter-anchoring tools is asking deliberate questions instead of reacting emotionally. When someone throws out a number or a frame that feels extreme, pause and ask, "What is that based on? Where did that figure come from? Can you show me comparable examples?" These questions force them to justify the anchor, which often reveals it as arbitrary and weakens its hold. Another tactic is to physically write down your own numbers and outcomes before you start a conversation. When anchors arrive, your brain now has a competing, concrete reference to return to. This is why professional negotiators prepare so intensely. They know the first number tossed into a room can sway even experts if they haven't fixed their own anchor. Counter-anchoring also works with time pressure. A persuader might say you must decide right now. Your counter is to state calmly, "I always make careful decisions. If this is real value, it will hold tomorrow." By anchoring the conversation in thoughtfulness and time, you remove the manipulator's ability to make urgency the frame. The key psychological insight is that anchors feel like reality even when they're arbitrary. Once you recognize that, you stop being pulled like a boat without a rudder and start setting your own markers. Good persuaders hope you arrive unprepared, so their first word becomes your truth. When you bring your own anchor, you shift the power dynamic. Now they must swim inside your frame, not you inside theirs. If you want to influence behavior over time, one of the deepest and most predictable forces in human psychology is our need to appear consistent. People work hard to align their actions with what they have said or done before because inconsistency feels like weakness or hypocrisy. Once we declare a belief publicly or take a stand, the brain wants to avoid the pain of admitting we were wrong. Persuaders know this and use it subtly. You can use it too, not to manipulate, but to create honest commitment and change. The classic research by Robert Cialdini showed how small commitments snowball. If someone signs a petition for safe driving, they are far more likely later to put a large safety sign on their lawn because they already see themselves as the kind of person who supports safe driving. Once you have said yes to something small, saying no to a bigger but related request feels inconsistent. Salespeople and activists use this foot-in-the-door technique everywhere. You can apply it to leadership and influence by asking for small, low-risk agreement early. If you want a colleague to support a major project, first ask if they agree the current system has flaws. If they say yes, later agreeing to a proposed fix feels consistent. If you want a friend to join a long-term effort, ask them first to endorse the values behind it. The secret is to let people build an identity step by step. Humans want to feel internally coherent. The more public or documented the commitment, the stronger the pull. Written notes, verbal confirmations in front of others, or even small symbolic actions deepen consistency. This is why good coaches ask athletes to state goals out loud and why marketers love social media shares. Every public signal of support builds a self-image that resists reversal. You can also use consistency defensively. When someone tries to manipulate you, remember that they may attempt to trap you with small yeses. A door-to-door seller may start by asking if you care about saving money. Who says no? Then every next request uses your earlier yes to box you in. Protect yourself by pausing before small agreements and by being comfortable saying, yes, I care about that in general, but that doesn't mean I want this specific product. You're drawing a boundary between values and actions to avoid being pulled into a commitment spiral. Leaders who understand consistency can help teams change by making the first steps easy and aligned with values people already hold. Instead of demanding massive change at once, they create a path of small commitments that feel natural to keep. Over time, these steps rewrite identity. People stop seeing themselves as outsiders to the new way and start seeing it as part of who they are. The power is gentle but profound. Humans want to believe they are stable characters in their own story. If you give them honest, meaningful ways to act consistently with the values they want to embody, you can lead without coercion and help them grow. And when you spot others trying to use this against you, you can slow down, separate your identity from the immediate request, and keep control of your choices instead of being steered by the human need to appear consistent. Passive aggression is one of the most frustrating social weapons because it hides behind plausible deniability. Instead of open disagreement, the passive-aggressive person uses subtle digs, delayed responses, backhanded compliments, or convenient forgetfulness to communicate resistance while avoiding direct confrontation. They might say, sure, I'll do it with a sigh that makes you feel guilty for asking, or constantly forget to complete something they promised. The strategy works on many people because it shifts the conflict into a fog. You feel wronged but can't prove it, and if you call it out, they can retreat behind I was just joking or you're overreacting. The way to outsmart this is to refuse the fog and stay direct and calm. That means naming what is happening without attack, asking for clarity, and setting clear expectations. When someone says something that sounds like a dig wrapped in kindness, wow, you're actually on time today, you don't have to joke back or get angry. You can respond with straightforward curiosity. What do you mean by that? This forces them to bring their implied hostility into the open where it loses power. When a coworker forgets tasks repeatedly, stop enabling by fixing it yourself. Instead, calmly note the pattern. I've noticed this deadline was missed again. What's going on? How can we make sure it's handled next time? Passive aggression thrives when the other person absorbs the cost silently. It dies when the cost is calmly handed back. Avoid sarcasm, which fuels their game, and avoid exploding, which gives them victim points. Your tone should be neutral but firm, like shining a light into a shadow. Over time, the person either becomes more direct or avoids using the tactic on you because it stops working. Another key is clarity in boundaries. Vague agreements are oxygen for passive aggression. Be explicit about deadlines, expectations, and consequences. If a housemate constantly forgets to clean, say clearly, we agreed to alternate. If it's not done by Sunday, I'll assume you're okay covering the cost of a cleaner. Direct, non-hostile follow-through makes the behavior expensive for them. Passive aggression can only function when you let it stay hidden. Directness pulls it into daylight and strips it of power. Tension in conversations often rises because everyone feels trapped between fight and flight. Should I attack or retreat? Humor breaks that binary and creates a third path, shared laughter. A well-timed joke or light comment can stop an argument's momentum and reset the emotional climate so rational thought can return. This works because laughter triggers the brain's social bonding chemistry. It signals safety, lowers stress hormones, and flips the nervous system out of fight mode. But using humor to diffuse requires skill. The goal isn't to mock or belittle, that escalates. The goal is to create relief and signal I'm not your enemy. Self-deprecating humor works well because it disarms without threatening. If a boss is tense about a mistake, saying, well, if we were trying to invent a new error category, I think I nailed it, can make them smile and open space for problem solving. Observational humor that includes both sides also works. This meeting got so serious we might need helmets. Avoid humor that targets the other person, especially if they're angry. It can feel dismissive. Timing matters too. Don't joke while someone is venting intense feelings. Wait for a pause where the mood can shift. In negotiations or debates, light humor about the process. We might need a snack break before we solve world peace. Can reduce defensiveness so both sides think clearer. Even in personal conflicts, couples who laugh together during tough conversations tend to stay connected because humor reminds them they're allies. The key is authenticity. Forced jokes feel manipulative. Notice small cracks where laughter could safely enter and offer it naturally. Humor isn't about avoiding issues. It's about lowering emotional voltage so issues can be addressed calmly. Used well, it turns confrontation into collaboration without losing respect. Authority intimidates many people because we're wired to respect power and expertise. When someone speaks with confidence and status, a boss, a doctor, a senior colleague, it's easy to defer even if something feels off. But authority loses control when faced with calm, well-prepared knowledge. Outsmarting authority doesn't mean disrespect. It means refusing blind obedience by arming yourself with facts and clarity. Most powerful people rely on the assumption that others won't challenge them because they seem to know more. Break that pattern by quietly knowing your stuff. If a manager tries to push an unfair change, understand company policy and relevant data before the meeting. If a doctor dismisses your symptoms, research reputable sources and ask precise questions. What evidence supports that diagnosis? Are there guidelines recommending a different test? Preparation turns intimidation into dialogue. Equally important is calm delivery. Aggressive challenges trigger defensiveness. Confident curiosity invites respect. Say, I've read the latest standards show X. Can you explain how this fits, rather than you're wrong? In group settings, cite sources and ask for clarification rather than accusation. The report from last quarter shows different numbers. Can we review that? This keeps you credible and non-threatening while still piercing the aura of unquestionable power. Over time, those who lead with bluster but little depth avoid challenging you because it backfires. Another tool is asking for transparency. Could you walk me through how you reached that conclusion? True experts welcome explaining, pretenders get exposed. Also, gather allies quietly. Informed questions asked by more than one person make it harder for authority to stonewall. Outsmarting authority isn't rebellion for its own sake. It's protecting yourself and your peers from being steamrolled by status when status isn't backed by substance. Knowledge and composure neutralize intimidation more effectively than open defiance, and they often earn you respect in the process. Sometimes the smartest and strongest move in any conflict, negotiation, or social game is to step back, not in defeat, but in deliberate control. Strategic withdrawal is the art of removing yourself from a situation that's unproductive, escalating, or stacked against you, in a way that preserves power rather than losing it. People often stay too long in bad arguments or bad deals because they feel walking away equals losing. But staying when conditions are hopeless burns energy and gives the other side control. The first step is to recognize when momentum is against you. If an argument is spiraling emotionally and no one is listening, if a negotiation keeps being pulled toward an unfair anchor you can't reset, if a social group is ganging up with peer pressure, continuing to engage feeds their frame. Instead, calmly disengage. I think we're not going to reach clarity right now. Let's pause and revisit later. In business deals, being willing to leave the table, politely but firmly, often triggers the other side's fear of loss and resets the dynamic. In personal conflict, stepping away before voices rise too high can protect a relationship and keep you from saying things you regret. The key is not to retreat in panic or silence. That communicates weakness. You leave intentionally and signal that the conversation is not over, just paused until it can be productive. Strategic withdrawal also protects against manipulation. Many power players try to wear you down with time, confusion, or emotional exhaustion. Exiting preserves your mental clarity. Think of lawyers who advise ending depositions when aggression turns abusive, or negotiators who schedule breaks to stop themselves from being cornered. Even socially, leaving a toxic gathering early and with composure communicates strength. You choose your environments. People respect those who know when to walk rather than be dragged. Negativity is contagious. Spend time with someone who constantly complains or see problems first, and soon you feel drained and pessimistic too. In debates and meetings, negative framing, this will fail, this is risky, nothing works, shuts down creativity and progress. You can't always silence negativity, but you can disarm it with reframing. Reframing is the skill of taking the same facts and viewing them through a more constructive lens without denying reality. Someone says this idea will probably fail, you can reframe. It might, but what would we learn if we tried? If a coworker says management never listens, you might reframe. True, but if we present data clearly, we have a better shot than if we stay silent. This isn't toxic positivity, it's shifting focus from despair to action. Psychologically, reframing works because the brain reacts to threat signals by shutting down creative problem solving. A new frame lowers threat and reopens resourceful thinking. Leaders use reframing constantly, calling a crisis a turning point, calling criticism a feedback loop, calling a delay a chance to improve. In personal life, reframing a setback as practice, not proof of failure, keeps you resilient. To outsmart chronic complainers, don't fight them head-on, that feeds conflict. Calmly restate their point with a twist toward possibility. I hear you that it's tough, maybe that means we can. Over time, this starves the cycle of hopelessness and either shifts the mood or protects you from getting sucked in. Reframing also guards your own mind. When you catch yourself spiraling in negative self-talk, this will never work, add yet, it hasn't worked yet. The facts haven't changed, but the future is now open. By reframing, you break the automatic slide into helplessness and create mental space to act. Emotional manipulation works because it hits feelings before reason wakes up. Someone tries to guilt you, shame you, flatter you, or scare you into compliance, hoping you'll act quickly just to escape the feeling. To spot it, you must learn to pause and ask, what emotion is this person trying to make me feel, and why now? Guilt manipulation sounds like you're selfish, after all I've done for you. Fear manipulation warns of dire outcomes if you don't comply. You'll lose everything if you don't act. Flattery manipulation showers you with praise. You're the only one smart enough to help, to hook your need for validation. Anger manipulation tries to intimidate so you'll surrender to end the discomfort. Once you identify the feeling being triggered, you break the spell. Instead of reacting to the feeling, you can step back and analyze the request logically. Manipulators depend on speed. They need you to act before thinking. Slow down and ask questions. When guilt hits, ask yourself, is this obligation real or created? When fear hits, check evidence. Is the threat credible? When flattery comes, ask, do they praise me to get something? Calmly requesting specifics, what exactly do you need from me? Forces manipulators to expose their agenda. Another tell is inconsistency. Manipulators often change stories or push urgency when questioned. True partners explain clearly and stay respectful. Protecting yourself means trusting discomfort as a signal. If an interaction feels off or rushed, it probably is. Breathe, pause, and evaluate. Over time, you become nearly immune to common ploys. You'll see guilt trips, scare tactics, and love bombing not as truth but as tools. That awareness doesn't make you cold. It makes you free to choose based on facts, not forced emotion. Overthinkers drain time and energy not because they mean harm, but because their minds spin endlessly, searching for certainty that never arrives. They ask for constant reassurance, revisit the same decisions, and worry aloud about every possible outcome. If you let them, they will pull you into their mental loop, and suddenly you are solving problems that do not exist or calming fears that grow stronger with every reassurance. Outsmarting overthinkers is not about cruelty. It is about protecting both your time and their ability to act. The key move is setting clear boundaries and giving structured responses. When someone keeps asking, what if questions that spiral further and further, avoid feeding the cycle with endless analysis. Instead, calmly define what you will and won't do. For example, if a colleague keeps second-guessing a plan you've already approved, you can say, we've reviewed this thoroughly, and the decision is final for now. If something changes, we'll revisit, but we're moving forward. You are closing the loop instead of keeping it open. In relationships, when an overthinking friend keeps texting late at night with worries, you might respond with compassion but also limits. I understand you're anxious. I can talk for 10 minutes now, but then I need to sleep. The combination of empathy and firmness works better than either alone. Overthinkers seek certainty because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Boundaries show them where certainty exists and where it doesn't. Another tactic is redirecting to action. When someone spirals through what-ifs, gently ask, what specific step can you take right now to make this better? Shifting from abstract fear to concrete movement often calms their mind. Protect your own focus by resisting the urge to solve every hypothetical. Over time, consistent boundaries teach overthinkers that you are supportive but not a dumping ground for endless rumination, and they adapt. Fear of missing out drives powerful decisions. People hate the idea that others are having opportunities, fun, or success while they stay behind. Marketers, social apps, and persuaders exploit this constantly by making things seem exclusive or scarce. But you can both use FOMO ethically to motivate action and protect yourself from being tricked by it. When you need to inspire engagement, launching a product, inviting people to a project, encouraging participation, highlight real scarcity or unique timing, early adopters get first access. This event won't repeat. Our team is closing applications next week. Genuine urgency helps people overcome procrastination. The danger comes when FOMO is fake or manipulative. Watch for signals. Is the scarcity verifiable? Is the deadline real or endlessly extended? Are they creating anxiety rather than value? Before acting, pause and ask, would I want this if it were widely available? Would it still make sense tomorrow? Calm breathing and stepping back from social media's highlight reels also weaken FOMO's grip. Understand that what you see is curated. Missing one event or product rarely ruins a life. Another protective tactic is defining your own priorities clearly. When you know what matters to you, career growth, meaningful relationships, health, you're less swayed by hype that doesn't serve those goals. To use FOMO effectively without manipulation, keep it truthful, show what's special but don't invent false panic. This builds trust and still moves people to act. To resist FOMO, slow your decision speed, verify claims, and remember that scarcity is often manufactured to bypass rational thought. In any workplace or social circle, factions form. People ally, gossip, compete for favor. Group politics can trap you if you choose sides too early or get pulled into drama that isn't yours. Outsmarting it requires a calm, deliberate neutrality, not aloofness, but balanced respect for everyone. The first rule is avoid gossip. Information shared in confidence often travels and paints you as untrustworthy. Instead, listen without feeding rumors. Respond to gossip neutrally. That's interesting, I'm not sure I know the full story. This neither confirms nor denies but keeps you out of the crossfire. Build relationships individually instead of as a block. Know people across groups so you aren't dependent on one faction's power. When conflict arises, stay focused on facts and shared goals, not personalities. Let's return to what we're trying to achieve rather than who's right. In meetings where politics play out, speak with calm logic rather than taking bait to attack or defend. Powerful players respect those who remain unshaken and objective. Another key is delivering consistent value. If you're reliable and competent, all sides see you as an asset worth keeping. That makes you harder to target. Neutral doesn't mean weak. It means you don't burn bridges you don't need to. Sometimes you must draw boundaries. If someone tries to force you to take a side, say, I respect both perspectives and want to stay focused on the work. Over time, this reputation protects you. Factions may rise and fall, but the person known for fairness and competence often outlasts them all. People are far more likely to support ideas, plans, and even leaders when they feel intelligent and capable in the process. One of the deepest social needs is to feel competent and respected. Many people think winning support means showing off your brilliance, but that often backfires. When you dominate with knowledge, others feel small, and smallness breeds resistance. The smarter strategy is to make people feel clever for agreeing with you. This begins with asking for input genuinely and highlighting good points they bring up. When someone offers a suggestion that aligns with your plan, acknowledge it. That's a great angle. It really strengthens what we're building. People back what they feel they helped shape. In meetings, let others explain key details instead of taking all the credit. Being seen as the source of insight makes them more invested. Psychologically, this works because we like ideas we think we had. Leaders who want buy-in present frameworks, then ask questions that lead people to discover the desired answer themselves. Teachers know students remember lessons they think they figured out rather than ones they were lectured on. In negotiations, letting the other side feel like they reached the conclusion saves face and builds commitment. Be careful not to patronize. It must be authentic respect. Ask real questions, listen, and spotlight contributions without stealing them. Also, avoid immediately correcting minor mistakes when someone is on the edge of supporting you. Let them feel smart for getting most of it right. Over time, this approach builds a network of allies who think of you as empowering rather than intimidating, and people fight harder for ideas they believe they understood first. Silent treatment is a form of control that works by triggering anxiety. Someone stops speaking to you not just to avoid conflict, but to make you feel ignored, small, or desperate to repair the connection. Many people cave quickly. They beg, apologize, over-explain just to end the painful silence. The way to outsmart this tactic is composure. Do not chase the silence or let it define your worth. Recognize it for what it is, a manipulation designed to make you uncomfortable enough to surrender. Instead of reacting with panic, maintain calm normalcy. If you live or work with the person, stay polite but neutral. Hello, good morning, while refusing to beg for conversation. In messages, respond once calmly if something needs action, but do not bombard with desperate texts. This emotional steadiness flips the power dynamic. The silent treatment relies on your distress, and when you do not provide it, the tactic loses strength. At the same time, hold healthy boundaries. If the silent treatment is being used to avoid resolving an issue, calmly name the behavior. I'd like to talk when you're ready, but ignoring me won't solve the problem. Then step back. You're showing openness without groveling. In relationships, breaking the cycle may mean giving space without punishment, but also refusing to reward the freeze-out with special effort. In professional settings, document when necessary and keep functioning. Silent treatment often collapses when it fails to derail your work. Composure does not mean emotional numbness. It means self-respect and patience until real dialogue can happen. It turns a manipulative freeze into wasted effort. Manipulators and aggressive negotiators love urgency because rushed people make poor choices. The faster they can force you to respond, the less time you have to think, verify, or seek advice. Strategic delay is a powerful counter. When you feel cornered by speed, sign now, answer now, decide now, slow the pace on purpose. Calmly say, I need to think about that overnight, or I'll get back to you tomorrow after reviewing the details. This pause recenters you and disrupts their momentum. It also signals quiet strength. People with real power are not rushed. Strategic delay isn't procrastination, it's targeted. You buy time to gather facts, consult allies, or let emotions cool. Sales tactics often rely on vanishing offers. Once you step back and wait, many final deals mysteriously stay open. In personal conflict, delaying gives both sides time to calm down and prevents saying things you regret. In negotiations, even a short pause, let's take a break, resets power and can make the other side reveal more. The psychology is simple. Urgency narrows focus and triggers fight or flight. Delay reactivates the rational brain. To use it well, communicate clearly so it doesn't feel like avoidance. State when you'll respond and follow through. For example, that's important, I want to review it and reply by tomorrow. In leadership, strategic pauses before answering questions create presence. You seem thoughtful, not flustered. In life, practicing delay as a reflex against pressure keeps you from being trapped in bad agreements, manipulative sales, or emotional fights. Control of time is control of power, and those who can slow things down hold the advantage. Ego battles happen when two or more people fight, openly or subtly, for status and recognition. These battles can derail meetings, destroy collaboration, and exhaust everyone around them. If you get pulled in, you risk looking defensive or petty. A smarter play is to redirect praise and attention in ways that disarm ego without surrendering your own position. When someone challenges you to prove superiority instead of escalating, give them recognition that satisfies their need for respect but keeps the focus on progress. For example, if a colleague aggressively corrects a small point to assert dominance, respond with something like, "That's a good clarification." It makes the overall idea stronger. You have validated their need to be seen as competent, which often ends the attack while moving back to the main goal. Leaders use this tactic constantly. When two team members compete, praising each contribution and then redirecting to the shared mission calms rivalry. In negotiation, if the other side is posturing, recognizing their expertise before calmly returning to terms lowers their defenses. The psychology is simple. Ego battles are fueled by insecurity. Praise feeds security and makes further fighting unnecessary. But the praise must be authentic and not groveling. Empty flattery smells like manipulation. Acknowledge real skill, knowledge, or insight, then pivot. This approach keeps you calm, respected, and above the fray. It's not about being submissive, it's about staying mission-focused when others are distracted by pride. In every group, there's the official structure, job titles, seating charts, formal roles, and the real structure. Who is listened to, who influences decisions, who people watch before they speak. Learning to read these hidden hierarchies gives you a strategic edge because power often doesn't match the org chart. Start by observing nonverbal cues. Who do people glance at when decisions are made? Who speaks and gets silence versus who gets interrupted? Who makes subtle suggestions that suddenly become the group's idea? Watch for informal hubs, the person everyone consults privately after meetings, the quiet one whose nod changes the mood. Also look for who controls resources, information access, introductions. Often it's not the highest title but the connector. In social settings, the real influencer may be the one telling the stories everyone laughs at or the person newcomers want to impress. Once you spot these dynamics, you can adapt, direct your pitches to the true decision maker, build relationships with quiet power holders, and avoid wasting energy on loud but powerless figures. This skill protects you from being blindsided by unseen alliances and helps you avoid missteps, like challenging someone you thought was unimportant but is deeply trusted. Over time, reading the room becomes intuitive. You notice microexpressions when the real leader is displeased, or the way a conversation halts when someone key isn't convinced. Success often depends less on the formal chain and more on the hidden one, and those who can map it early navigate politics with far less pain. Cynicism can sound smart because it feels safe. Doubting, mocking, and dismissing ideas protects against disappointment and risk. In groups, cynics often dominate because tearing down is easier than building up, but cynicism can kill progress and creativity if left unchecked. Outsmarting it isn't about blind cheerfulness, it's about pairing hope with solid reasoning. When a cynic says that'll never work, don't argue emotionally with, "Oh, come on, be positive." Instead, calmly bring facts and rational optimism. Actually, here's data showing similar ideas have succeeded, and here's our plan to handle the risks. Cynicism thrives on vague doubt. It withers when faced with clear evidence and practical pathways. Another tactic is reframing risk. Cynics focus on potential failure as proof of stupidity. You can agree risk exists, but show that inaction also has cost. True, it might fail, but doing nothing guarantees staying stuck. Leaders use this constantly. They respect skepticism, but show that calculated action beats paralysis. Humor can also help. Light joking about endless negativity, "We could win the lottery and you'd say the taxes will kill us," can break its grip without hostility. Importantly, don't feed cynicism with defensiveness. Stay calm and confident. Overreaction proves their point that hope is naive. Optimistic logic is resilient. It doesn't deny challenges, but it shows a clear-eyed path forward. Over time, this stance earns respect even from skeptics because it's neither foolishly sunny nor frozen by fear. It keeps teams moving when doubt threatens to stall everything. Attention is one of the most valuable currencies in modern life. Everyone is fighting for it: advertisers, coworkers, friends, social media, because attention signals value. When you give it freely and constantly, people take it for granted. When you make it scarce and deliberate, it becomes powerful. Scarcity does not mean coldness or arrogance. It means your focus is intentional and earned. The first step is understanding how people interpret attention. When someone always replies instantly, always listens for hours, always shows up on demand, they may seem supportive, but subconsciously they teach others that their time has no cost. When someone occasionally pauses, takes time to respond, or gives focused but limited energy, they signal self-worth. Humans value what is not automatic. To use this power ethically, start by setting clear boundaries. Respond when you can truly focus, not immediately out of habit. When you enter a conversation, be fully present, but when it's done, exit instead of lingering endlessly. In leadership, do not attend every meeting. Show up when your presence matters and make those appearances impactful. In friendships, being generous with attention but also having your own life creates respect. In dating and social dynamics, instant and constant availability often lowers attraction because it signals no competing priorities. Selective availability creates interest and respect. Psychologically, this works because of scarcity and intermittent reinforcement. What isn't guaranteed is valued more. To avoid manipulation, combine scarcity with warmth. Be fully attentive when you choose to give time. Don't weaponize distance to create anxiety. The goal is healthy self-respect, not emotional games. Over time, people learn that your attention means something and they engage more thoughtfully when they have it. Some people flood conversations with personal details to create instant intimacy or control the social space. Oversharing can make you feel pressured to match their vulnerability or give up your own privacy. It's also used strategically by manipulators who reveal a lot early to seem trustworthy, then mine your disclosures for leverage. Outsmarting this doesn't mean shutting down connection. It means staying aware and managing what you share. The key tool is strategic listening. You allow the other person to talk, show empathy, but don't mirror with equal depth unless you truly want to. Most people overshare because silence feels awkward or because they use vulnerability to pull you closer. Resist the automatic urge to fill silence with your secrets. Instead, keep the focus on them with gentle, curious questions. "That's interesting. How did you handle it? Tell me more about what happened." This keeps the conversation warm while protecting your own information. Another tactic is neutral self-disclosure. Share small, harmless facts if you need balance, but avoid details that create vulnerability before trust is earned. If someone keeps pressing for personal information, redirect politely. "I prefer to keep that private, but I'm curious, what made you interested?" Confident boundaries often earn respect. In professional settings, strategic listening protects against gossip traps. You stay informed without giving fuel. In personal life, it helps you build real connection at your own pace. The psychological power is that curiosity feels good to the other person. They don't notice that you're not matching vulnerability. This way you remain kind and engaged while staying safe and in control of your privacy. Influence rarely comes from one grand gesture. It grows from a steady pattern of reliability that people learn to trust. Humans are wired to notice consistency because it signals safety and competence. Someone who shows up on time, keeps promises, follows through on small commitments, and maintains stable behavior slowly builds a reputation that outweighs louder but unreliable people. This is why quiet professionals often rise in organizations. They become the go-to because they always deliver. To build influence this way, focus less on dramatic wins and more on small, repeatable actions. Respond when you say you will. Meet deadlines even for minor tasks. Show kindness and respect predictably rather than only when convenient. Over time, these small acts stack into an identity. People think of you as dependable and trustworthy. This consistency makes your voice powerful in decisions because others unconsciously believe that someone reliable in action is probably reliable in judgment. In social groups, the person who steadily supports and doesn't gossip gains quiet authority. When they speak, others listen. Psychologically, this taps into the brain's preference for predictability. We follow those we can count on. Another advantage is that consistency builds self-trust. When you prove to yourself that you follow through, you project calm confidence. To strengthen this effect, avoid overpromising. Commit only to what you can sustain and then overdeliver slightly. Don't chase every new trend. Stay anchored in your values and be known for them. Influence built this way is slow but extremely resilient. It doesn't collapse when flashier people fail, and it often outlasts louder competition. It's the power of quiet credibility, earned action by action. Every person has emotional hooks, sensitive spots that, when pressed, create instant, powerful reactions. Manipulators, skilled persuaders, and even well-meaning people sometimes pull these hooks to get what they want. Maybe yours are fear of rejection, desire for approval, guilt about saying no, or anger when feeling disrespected. The key to outsmarting emotional manipulation is to know your own triggers so well that when someone pulls them, you feel the tug but don't lose control. Start by noticing patterns. When have you made impulsive decisions or regretted words? Was it after feeling unfairly accused, abandoned, insulted, or pressured? Those moments reveal your hooks. Once identified, practice pausing when they're activated. When someone tries to guilt you after all I've done for you, breathe and remind yourself, guilt is just a feeling, not a contract. When someone provokes anger with disrespect, pause and ask, do I want to give them power by exploding? If fear of missing out is a hook, step back whenever you hear urgency. You must act now or lose everything. Slow down the timeline deliberately. Hooks lose power when you see them being pulled in real time. This also works in relationships. Partners or family may unconsciously press your old wounds to win arguments. Calmly naming it, I feel guilt right now, but that doesn't mean I owe you this, can break the pattern. In business, recognizing how fear, greed, or flattery is used helps you stay rational in sales or negotiations. Emotional triggers can't be erased, but self-awareness turns them from buttons others press into signals that you need to slow down and think. The less reactive you are, the harder it is for anyone to control you. Facts don't live in a vacuum. How you frame them determines how others feel about them. Framing is the subtle but powerful act of choosing what context and meaning wrap around a fact. The same job can be described as a chance to grow or as an exhausting workload. The same delay can be a failure or an investment in quality. Whoever controls the frame shapes the reaction. If you want to persuade, you must master framing. Start by asking, what story am I telling around this fact? If you pitch a project as risky and expensive, people fear it. If you present it as a long-term safeguard against bigger losses, fear turns to prudence. In conflict, reframing someone's attack changes energy. Instead of "you're ignoring me," say "we both want to feel heard. How can we do that?" This moves from blame to cooperation. Leaders constantly use framing. Economic downturn becomes market correction. Layoffs become restructuring. Mistakes become learning. While this can be manipulative, it's also essential for clarity. Raw facts can paralyze. Framing can help yourself too. Calling a challenge an experiment makes fear manageable. Calling failure feedback keeps motivation alive. To use it ethically, don't hide truth. Reshape perspective without lying. To defend against bad framing, ask, what's another way to see this? Who benefits if I accept their version? By questioning the first frame presented, you reclaim mental freedom. In negotiations, reframing can change standards. Instead of "is this cheap enough?" ask, "is this valuable enough to solve our real problem?" That shift can win deals. Mastering framing means mastering emotional impact, and it's one of the quietest but strongest influence tools available. Humans naturally compare. Our brains evolved to scan where we rank in a group because status once meant survival. But today, endless comparison on social media, at work, among friends, creates insecurity and manipulation. Marketers and influencers thrive by setting the metric: wealth, beauty, productivity. You feel behind because you're measuring by their chosen yardstick. To outsmart this, change the metric to one that serves you. First, notice when envy or inadequacy hits. Ask, what standard am I using and who set it? If someone flaunts luxury cars and you feel small, remember your real goal may be freedom or creativity, not cars. Measure progress by what you value, not what they sell. This also breaks manipulation. A company shows perfect vacation photos to sell lifestyle. You can reframe success as depth of relationships or peace of mind. In workplaces, avoid chasing promotions just because peers do. Ask what role fits your life priorities. Changing metrics also helps mental health. Instead of comparing your day to highlight reels online, compare to your own past growth. Social scientists call this self-referenced evaluation. It's more motivating and less toxic. When others try to shame you with their metric, "Why aren't you married yet? Why not richer?" Calmly redefine. "My focus right now is building stability and joy, not just rushing milestones." They lose power when their scoreboard isn't yours. This doesn't mean ignoring ambition. It means choosing battles that matter. Once you own your metrics, you stop playing rigged games and start living by values that make you strong instead of anxious. Competition can push people to achieve, but it can also waste energy, create enemies, and trap you in zero-sum thinking where someone must lose for you to win. One of the most powerful social skills is the ability to flip competitive tension into cooperative momentum. This does not mean avoiding ambition. It means reframing the relationship so both sides benefit from working together rather than fighting. Start by identifying shared goals. Even in rival workplaces or academic settings, there are usually overlapping interests. Saving time, learning, improving quality, gaining visibility. Instead of hiding knowledge, selectively share something useful to show goodwill. For example, if a colleague is racing you for recognition on a project, you might say, "I've noticed we're both chasing the same result. Maybe we can divide the work and both look good." This approach surprises because competitors expect secrecy or hostility. Psychologically, it taps into reciprocity. Cooperation offered often inspires return cooperation. It also removes fear. Competitors fear losing status, but collaboration lets them keep dignity while winning too. Another tool is public credit. When you praise a competitor's strength openly, you lower their need to fight and can then propose synergy. Leaders who unite rival departments often start with genuine recognition of each side's achievements before inviting them to work together. Be cautious, do not overshare critical advantage, and watch for those who accept help but still play dirty. But even then, being seen as collaborative and fair can win allies and make you resilient. Others respect and protect those who try to lift the group rather than crush it. Turning competition into collaboration saves energy, expands your network, and often produces better results than lonely battles. Sabotage rarely comes out of nowhere. It's usually fueled by clear motives: fear of losing status, envy, desire for control, or self-protection. People who feel threatened may quietly undermine you by withholding info, spreading doubt, or creating obstacles. Outsmarting sabotage starts with prediction. Ask yourself who benefits if I fail, who might feel replaced, who could be insecure about this success. Once you know where danger comes from, you can protect yourself. Build redundancy, keep important information documented and shared so no one can hide or destroy it. Maintain relationships across the network so a saboteur can't isolate you. Communicate your progress openly so false rumors die fast. In meetings, summarize agreements in writing afterward so others can't later deny or twist them. Psychologically, sabotage thrives in shadows. Transparency and preparation starve it. Another tactic is engaging possible saboteurs early with respect. Sometimes including them, asking input, or recognizing their expertise turns them from enemy to ally because it soothes insecurity. But if sabotage continues, stay factual and calm when exposing it. Here's what we agreed, here's the evidence, here's what changed. Anger can backfire by making you seem unstable. Facts and clarity win support. Anticipating motives also protects your own emotions. Instead of shock and hurt, you feel strategic and proactive. People who expect sabotage not out of paranoia, but from understanding power dynamics rarely get blindsided. They stay steady and hard to knock off course. Human brains remember incomplete things better than finished ones. This is the Zeigarnik effect, discovered when a psychologist noticed waiters easily recalled unpaid orders but forgot them after customers left. An unfinished task lingers in memory because the brain wants closure. You can use this to make ideas, stories, or yourself stick in other people's minds. In presentations, don't give every answer up front. Pose a compelling question, explore it, then leave a small unresolved thread that invites later conversation. Writers and speakers use cliffhangers because unfinishedness keeps the audience thinking. In business pitches, you can outline a vision but hold back one key detail for the next meeting. They'll keep you top of mind because their brains want completion. Casual influence: when meeting someone new, sharing an intriguing but incomplete story. "That trip changed everything for me," and stopping invites curiosity and memory. To stay ethical, don't manipulate by withholding critical safety information or misleading. Use it to keep engagement alive. You can also apply the Zygarnik effect to learning and creativity. Stop work at an interesting point instead of at a dead end. Your brain will keep chewing on the problem and return more inspired. For defending yourself, notice when marketers and manipulators use this, teasing what you'll get if you click, buy, or join, and ask if the curiosity is worth it. Knowing about the effect lets you decide instead of being pulled unconsciously. Mastering it helps you be memorable, persuasive, and creative without shouting for attention. When people feel attacked, judged, or cornered, their brains switch from reasoning to protection. They deflect blame, justify, or counterattack, and logical arguments bounce off like arrows against a shield. If you want to influence or solve problems with defensive people, the key is empathy, not surrender, but understanding that melts resistance. Start by showing you see their perspective before pushing your own. Simple phrases like "I understand why this might feel frustrating," or "I can see how you came to that conclusion" tell their brain you're not an enemy. This lowers the amygdala-driven fight response and reopens the rational prefrontal cortex. Stay curious, ask questions about their concerns rather than debating them. When someone says, "This isn't my fault," instead of arguing, you might respond, "Help me understand what happened on your side." When they feel heard, they stop guarding so tightly. Avoid public shaming. Defensive people dig in when they feel watched. Talk privately when possible. Also, keep your tone calm and body language open. Crossed arms or eye rolls signal judgment and reignite defense. In negotiation or leadership, framing feedback as collaboration. How can we solve this together? Instead of blame, keeps doors open. Empathy doesn't mean agreeing with everything. It's a strategy to calm the storm so real dialogue can happen. Once defenses drop, you can discuss facts, solutions, and boundaries without triggering more fight. Over time, you become someone who can handle conflict without turning it toxic because you know how to reach the human beneath the armor. Conversations, especially long meetings or debates, can wander until no one knows what's been agreed. Whoever steps in to summarize clearly and calmly often gains control because humans crave clarity and closure. A strategic summary gathers threads, sets the frame, and subtly positions you as the organizer of truth. To use this power, listen actively for key points and turning moments. When things get messy, step in. So far we've agreed that X is the main goal, Y is the obstacle, and we have two options on the table. Am I missing anything? This does several things. It stops chaos, makes people feel heard, and subtly defines what matters. If someone's point gets ignored, including it shows fairness and builds trust. If a manipulator is twisting the narrative, your summary can reset. Just to clarify, what was actually decided was A and B, C was only discussed. In conflict, summarizing emotions as well as facts helps. I'm hearing that you're frustrated about deadlines and worried about quality. Is that right? This reduces heat and opens solutions. Psychologically, people relax when someone makes complexity simple. They often defer to the summarizer because clarity feels like leadership. To defend against misuse, beware of biased summaries. Someone may subtly distort. If you spot that, gently correct. I'd like to add that we also discussed practicing strategic summaries makes you powerful in meetings, negotiations, and even personal talks. You become the anchor people look to when things get foggy. Exploiters thrive on unclear limits. They push little by little extra work without pay, favors beyond comfort, emotional demands you never agreed to until you're drained. Outsmarting them requires boundaries that are clear, consistent, and enforced calmly. First, know your limits, what you're willing to give and what you're not. Many people get exploited because they haven't defined this and decide case by case under pressure. Write down your non-negotiables, time you need for yourself, tasks outside your role, emotional labor you won't carry. Then communicate boundaries early and neutrally. I can help until 5, then I have other commitments. If someone pushes, repeat once without justifying. Calm repetition signals strength. If they still test, follow through with consequences, stop doing the task, escalate if needed, leave the situation. Exploiters often rely on guilt and anger to break you. Staying calm is critical. They want you flustered so you'll cave. Instead, be a quiet wall, polite but immovable. Another tactic is preemptive clarity. When starting a new role or relationship, state limits kindly so exploitation never starts. Psychologically, exploiters search for easy targets. Once they sense you're firm, they move on. Boundaries are not cruelty, they're self-respect. Healthy people will accept and even admire them. Only those who want to use you will resent them, which is useful information. Over time, clear limits save your energy for people and projects that deserve it and make you far harder to manipulate. Human brains do not judge value in isolation, we compare. A room feels warm after stepping in from the cold. A price feels cheap if we first saw a higher one. This is the contrast effect, and skilled persuaders use it constantly. You can make almost anything seem better, worse, cheaper, or more exciting depending on what you place next to it. Marketers show a very expensive product first, so the next option feels like a bargain. Real estate agents take buyers to an overpriced, flawed house before the one they actually want to sell. You can use this principle to make your own ideas more appealing. When pitching a plan, first show a less ideal alternative so yours shines in comparison. If asking for support, present the harder path you could take alone before offering the collaborative path. Even in social life, the contrast effect works. If you want to introduce a big change, first talk about an even riskier or costlier option so your real proposal feels reasonable. The key is ethical use. Don't manipulate with false extremes. Just understand that perception is relative. Defensively, watch for when others do this to you. Salespeople often anchor with a high-priced option, then offer a deal. Recruiters show a terrible job before the one they want you to accept. Pause and ask, would I still value this if I hadn't just seen the alternative? By noticing contrast, you regain rational control and stop reacting purely to comparison. Mastering this effect lets you make your points memorable and persuasive without trickery, and it shields you from being steered by artificial framing. Every tactic, every manipulation, every persuasive trick boils down to understanding how people actually think and feel, not how we imagine they should. To truly outsmart others ethically and effectively, you must study human nature with curiosity rather than judgment. Humans crave belonging but fear exclusion, so social pressure and silent confidence matter. We seek consistency, so small commitments can grow into big ones. We compare constantly, so framing and contrast shape our choices. We react to fear, guilt, and flattery faster than reason, so those who pause and analyze gain freedom. We respect common clarity, so those who summarize and stay composed lead even without titles. We want to feel smart, safe, seen, and significant, and those who grant that feeling build deep influence. The final lesson is not to exploit these truths, but to live above them, to know when they're used on you, to choose consciously rather than react, and to wield them responsibly when you need to persuade or protect yourself. Mastering human nature means self-awareness first. Know your own triggers, your own desire for approval, your own FOMO, so you can't be played. Then observe others without malice. What drives them? What fears shape their choices? Approach influence as connection, not domination. You'll persuade better by making others feel valued than by crushing them. You'll defend yourself better by spotting manipulation calmly instead of angrily. True mastery is quiet. It's the ability to move through conversations, negotiations, and conflicts without being hijacked, while helping others feel seen and guiding outcomes toward fairness and sense. Outsmarting everyone isn't about superiority, it's about freedom. The freedom to think clearly, act intentionally, and shape your world rather than being shaped by hidden psychological currents.